Just as he was about to speak again, a tall figure suddenly blocked his way. That was Fire Rock. As expected, in the end, were these two still father and son? Lu Chen narrowed his eyes and stared at Huiyan's back. Huiyan stood motionless, but for some reason, his back seemed to tremble slightly. Perhaps it was because he felt a little cold. However, his face was still looking forward, looking at his father and son who were in a state of rage. Perhaps Fire Tiger could still barely control his emotions, but it seemed as if the young Fire Hawk could no longer endure it. His eyes had already turned red, and a beast-like roar came from his throat. It seemed as if Lu Chen's provocation towards Fire Tiger had completely infuriated him. Thus, even with Huiyan standing between them, Fire Hawk was still unable to endure it. Huiyan noticed Fire Hawk's appearance and frowned. Just as he was about to stop him, Fire Hawk suddenly roared and pulled out a blade from his waist. Then, like all the warriors of the Black Fire tribe, he roared and rushed forward, swinging his blade at Lu Chen. At the same time, he shouted, "Bold bastard, how dare you speak to your grandfather like that? I'll cut you to death." The blade cut through the sky, bringing with it a trace of coldness. The entire situation seemed to be about to escalate at this moment. Lu Chen sneered, the Black Fire tribesmen were shocked, and Fire Tiger reached out to pull him back but was unable to. All the warriors of the Black Fire tribe, without exception, stood in place without moving. No one stopped Fire Hawk, but no one rushed out to help him either. For a moment, Fire Tiger seemed to have sensed something. His gaze swept across the surroundings, and his expression became more and more unsightly. Huiyan snorted coldly and frowned. His body moved slightly, looking like he wanted to go forward and stop his son. However, at this moment, everyone in the camp suddenly heard the shrill howl of a wolf. A black shadow suddenly scuttled out from Lu Chen's side like a bolt of lightning, instantly pouncing on the Fire Hawk who had just drawn his blade and charged over with lightning speed, instantly pinning him to the ground. That was Black Wolf Atsu. The huge wolf body seemed to directly crush the youth's resistance, and Atsu easily pushed him to the ground. Then, with a roar, it opened its bloody mouth with sharp fangs and directly bit down on Fire Hawk's throat. Everyone's expression changed. No matter what, Fire Hawk was still the grandson of Chief Huahu and the only son of the next chief, Huiyan. For a moment, only a series of whooshing sounds could be heard. Finally, 7 or 8 figures rushed out and pounced on Atsu. But it looked like it was too late. In the blink of an eye, those huge fangs had already bitten Fire Hawk's neck. At this moment, Huiyan suddenly turned around and shouted at Lu Chen, "Stop! Stop!" Almost at the same time, Lu Chen also shouted to stop Atsu. Atsu's movement stopped at this critical moment, but its sharp fangs did not leave Fire Hawk, whose face had already turned as pale as paper. It pounced on Fire Hawk's body, and then glanced at Lu Chen from the corner of its eye. Lu Chen ignored it. He did not speak, nor did he make any movements. He only looked indifferently at the burly barbarian in front of him. After a moment, he said, "What do you want to do?" Huiyan gritted his teeth. After a moment, he said in a low voice, word by word, "He is my son." Lu Chen did not speak, and only quietly looked at him. Huiyan's gaze also met his without flinching. Just like this, after an unknown amount of time, Lu Chen slowly nodded, then took a step forward and walked past Huiyan. When he reached Huiyan's side, he waved his hand. Atsu growled and finally let go of the barbarian youth. It trotted all the way back to Huiyan's side. At the same time, Lu Chen used a voice that only Huiyan could hear and said, "He is your son, but he just attacked a tribal priest. Do you still remember the consequences of this kind of reckless behavior a few hundred years ago?" Huiyan silently stood where he was. His expression was abnormally ugly, but he did not say anything. He only watched as Lu Chen walked away. The conflict within the Black Fire tribe suddenly stopped, and then the entire tribe camp seemed to have regained its peaceful and joyful atmosphere. However, whether it was the Black Fire tribe members or the large number of Divine Wood captives, they could all feel the faint undercurrent under the calm surface. Everyone dispersed, and then there were people who came forward to settle down the Divine Wood captives. Although someone had previously promised to let them join the Black Fire tribe, it was obviously not a good time to bring this up. After the sky turned dark, in the northeast corner of the camp, in a stone house that had been specially cleared out, Atu the Black Wolf laid at the door, while Lu Chen leaned against the window, looking at the moon that had just risen in the night sky. Apart from the two of them, there was another person in the house. It was Huoyan. He was sitting not far from Lu Chen, looking somewhat silent. Lu Chen retracted his gaze from the slowly rising moon and looked at Huoyan, saying, "What are you thinking about?" Huoyan was silent for a moment, then said, "Why did you deliberately do that in front of the entire tribe?" Lu Chen lightly said, "According to the rules of your tribe, I am now a priest." "What do you think a tribal priest would have done in that kind of situation?" Huoyan did not speak. Lu Chen sneered, saying, "If it was any other priest or shaman in the history of the Black Fire tribe, if they met someone who dared to offend them like today, then your son would already be a dead man." He waved his hand, saying calmly, "You know, I was lenient because of you." Huoyan said with some difficulty, "You have to give them a little more time, so that they can accept these things now." "What you and I lack the most is time," Lu Chen said bluntly. "I did what I did because I had no other choice." Huoyan said, "But, if you continue to be so strong, with such powerful witchcraft, sooner or later, your prestige in the tribe will even surpass mine." Lu Chen stared at him, and after a moment said, "You are starting to worry about me?" Huoyan was silent for a long time, then slowly nodded, saying, "Yes. I never thought that in the cultivation of the Black Fire spiritual power, you would advance so much in such a short time." He looked up at Lu Chen, saying, "With your intelligence, and the Black Fire witchcraft, I think, it won't be long before the Black Fire tribe is completely under your control. Am I right?" He looked at Lu Chen, saying word by word. Chapter 322. The room was very quiet. Neither Lu Chen nor Huoyan spoke for a long time. Atsu's huge body completely blocked the door. It didn't look like a monster, but more like an overfed dog. It glanced at the people in the room tiredly and yawned. It seemed to be bored and slowly narrowed its eyes. "Do you know what you're saying?" Lu Chen looked at Huoyan and said calmly, "You're actually worried that a human will steal the entire Black Fire tribe?" Huoyan shook his head and said, "You're not a normal human. You're now the messenger of the Fire God, the priest of our Black Fire tribe. For thousands of years, we barbarians have long been used to obeying the orders of shamans and priests. As long as you truly gain the respect of the entire tribe, then they will definitely listen to your orders, and from then on, obtain supreme power. Then what do I want this power for?" Lu Chen suddenly interrupted him and asked Huoyan. Huoyan was silent. Lu Chen laughed coldly and said, "Don't forget, from beginning to end, it was you who dragged me into this. I have no interest in your barbarian games or things like reviving glory. How about this? If you're really worried, then tell me how to return to the north. I'll immediately leave this place and let your Black Fire tribe sleep peacefully. How about that?" Huoyan thought for a while, then looked very seriously at Lu Chen and said, "You can't leave." Lu Chen rolled his eyes and said unhappily, "If I didn't know that you're a fanatic believer of the Fire God, then no matter how I force you, it'll be useless. Otherwise, would really want to cast a Black Fire curse on you and let you have a taste of that." Although Huoyan was brave, he couldn't help but frown when he heard those words. He looked at Lu Chen with a complicated expression and said after a moment of hesitation, "Speaking of which, didn't you make a promise to the Divine Wood tribe that you would personally guarantee their fate? Why do you want to leave this place so soon? Have you ever thought that after you leave, won't they all fall into a miserable fate after being abandoned by you? In this way, isn't it breaking your oath? What's there to be afraid of? When I swore that day, I only talked about the Black Fire tribe, not myself," Lu Chen replied calmly. Huiyan was momentarily speechless. After which, he looked at Lu Chen's expression and bitterly laughed for a moment. However, he shook his head and said, "Forget it, let's not talk about this. There's something I need to discuss with you." Lu Chen said, "What is it?" "Speak." Huiyan said, "You are now an official priest of our Black Fire tribe. Please don't say that." Lu Chen waved his hand and said, "Your father, the current chief of the Black Fire tribe, hasn't acknowledged me yet. My position isn't stable. Who knows, I might be removed in 2 or 3 days." Huiyan sighed and said, "My father still can't understand our thoughts and methods for now. But don't worry, as long as I'm here, he will always stand on your side. Moreover, I don't believe that you can't see that after the battle at the Divine Wood Camp, the strongest and most elite warriors of our tribe have already accepted you. They are especially respectful towards you." Lu Chen laughed and said, "That's because they received more women and servants after the battle, right? That's also because your witchcraft is so powerful. We, the barbarians of the southern wilderness, are born to respect the strong." Lu Chen smiled and didn't say anything. Huiyan continued, "As for my father, you don't have to worry about him. I will often go over to discuss these matters with him. No matter what, it is the will of the fire god to cooperate with you. I have no doubt about this. No matter what, I will carry this matter to the end." Lu Chen looked deeply at him, a strange light seemed to flash in the depths of his eyes. Huiyan paused for a moment, then said to Lu Chen, "Let's not talk about these troublesome matters first. But I have discovered that you seem to be missing one person." Lu Chen was startled and said, "Missing who?" Huiyan said, "Missing someone to serve you. You are now a priest of the tribe. Your identity and status are different from others. You should find someone to help you with the daily chores of cleaning the house and preparing meals." No need, it's too troublesome." Lu Chen immediately shook his head and wanted to decline. But Huiyan's expression was resolute. He stood up and walked out. At the same time, he said, "Leave this matter to me. I will help you find a satisfactory and hardworking person. You don't have to worry about this." How could Lu Chen not care? He spent his days alone with the Atsu. He wasn't afraid of any secret matters being leaked. If there was suddenly a barbarian by his side, wouldn't his hands and feet be tied? But Huiyan seemed to be an impatient person. After saying those words, he strode out of the house. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared. Lu Chen chased to the door. When he looked outside, he could no longer see Huiyan's back. Lu Chen looked up at the sky. After a moment, he spat out a mouthful of impure air. He smiled bitterly and said, "Forget it, let's leave it be." Huiyan fulfilled his promise the next morning. He brought the person he wanted to the door of the stone house that Lu Chen lived in. Last night, the mysterious and terrifying black-robed priest didn't seem to do anything strange. He just sat quietly under the wall of the house. His big black wolf was still loyally lying on the ground in front of the door, watching the people coming and going in the camp. For thousands of years, Lu Chen was the first human to come to the southern wilderness. So Huiyan certainly couldn't find another human to serve him. So, the person that Huiyan brought over this morning was a barbarian. It was a female barbarian. She looked to be about 18 or 19 years old. She was still very young, but her expression seemed to be full of grief. When she looked at Lu Chen, her gaze seemed to be very complicated. It seemed that she was thinking about how to avenge the deaths of her clansmen. How to secretly get rid of this incomparably cruel black-robed priest. Lu Chen stared at the woman for a while. Then he turned around and walked to Huiyan's side. He glared at him and sneered, "Are you afraid that I won't die fast enough?" Huiyan heard this and said, "How could there be such a thing?" Lu Chen pointed at the young body that was kneeling on the ground and sneered, "This woman is clearly a young woman that no one in the Divine Wood tribe has claimed. Why did you send her to me? What do you want? Let her serve you. Huiyan laughed loudly. Then he waved his hand and turned around to leave. Lu Chen was somewhat helpless. He was about to say something when he turned around and looked at the young barbarian. He sighed and asked, "What is your name?" "My name is Yi." Chapter 323. Yezi was a barbarian girl. Because she was young, her skin looked better than most of the barbarians in the wilderness. However, there were still obvious characteristics of the barbarians on her body. For example, there were sharp fangs protruding from the corners of her mouth, tattoos on her body, and she was actually quite tall. When Lu Chen called her up, he found that this barbarian girl was almost as tall as him. In fact, from the aesthetic point of view of the human race, most people would not be able to accept barbarian women. However, it was probably because of her young age. In general, this woman named Yezi seemed to be more pleasing to the eye than the ferocious barbarians outside. Compared to those barbarians who like to have their faces covered with twisted patterns and talisman tattoos, Ye's exposed skin only had 2 tattoos on her upper left arm and right thigh. This was also the reason why she looked more delicate. However, having been in the Black Fire tribe for so long, Lu Chen roughly knew some of the barbarians' customs. It was not that Yezi did not want to have those colorful tattoos on her face, but because those tattoos on the face often meant boasting, meritorious deeds, achievements, or other qualifications. It was not something that could be casually tattooed on. It was probably because this barbarian girl was too young and not qualified enough. While Lu Chen was sizing up the barbarian girl, Yezi was also secretly looking at him. The women of the tribe were still more gentle than the aggressive male warriors. In her eyes, there was a bit of awe and curiosity, but it seemed to be mixed with a bit of resentment. Lu Chen quickly noticed this. He did not have any intention of guessing, but directly asked Yezi about her origin and identity. Yezi lowered her head and said. Just as Lu Chen had guessed, Yezi was a member of the Divine Wood tribe who had surrendered after their tribe was exterminated. Would he let a woman who had a grudge against him, and who might even have relatives who died in the war started by Lu Chen by his side? Huiyan's burly and brave figure flashed in front of Lu Chen's eyes. He thought to himself, what is this guy, whose mind is far more detailed and profound than the other barbarians, thinking? Did he have some ulterior motive, or was it simply because it was convenient? Currently, the atmosphere within the Black Fire tribe was rather delicate. Patriarch Huahu was clearly dissatisfied with Huiyan and Lu Chen's actions. Despite Huahu's advanced age, many of the tribe's warriors stood on the side of Huiyan and Lu Chen. However, he had been the chief of the tribe for many years after all. He was a person of virtue and prestige, and no one could ignore him. Not to mention that Huahu was Huiyan's father after all. They were related by blood, so ordinary people could not do anything to him. Even in the barbarian tribes, which were known for their ferocity and savagery, it was not popular for the sons to go against their elders, or for the sons to fall out with their fathers and even fight with them. Under such circumstances, it might not be convenient for Huiyan to directly call for a tribesman from the Black Fire tribe to serve Lu Chen. Instead, he would not need to be courteous with the Divine Tree captives, and would be able to account to the Black Fire tribe. As for what Lu Chen had said before about giving these people equal treatment, let's just wait and see. Probably not many people would take it seriously. Lu Chen pondered in silence, while Yi just stood there. She did not dare to move until she received the orders of this mysterious and terrifying priest. Just like that, after an unknown period of time, Lu Chen suddenly withdrew his gaze and looked at her again. "Come here," he said calmly, but his tone seemed to have an unquestionable aura. Yi lowered her head and responded, slowly walking in front of him. Like most of the barbarians, Ye's clothes were mainly animal skins, supplemented by small stones of various shapes and colors, animal teeth, and small bones as ornaments. The harsh sandstorm on the wilderness did not seem to have damaged the beauty and youth of this barbarian girl. The exposed skin on her arms and thighs was still fair. But not far in front of her, the man stood in front of her like a mass of darkness. One black and one white, the shadow and the light, juxtaposed in such a somewhat dazzling way in the stone house. But at least at this moment, Ye's whiteness looked particularly small and fragile. In front of the threatening dark aura, or because of the awe she had for the shaman and the priest since she was a child, even if she still held a trace of resentment in her heart, Ye could not help but kneel down. She was just an ordinary barbarian girl. She did not have the powerful force of the barbarian warriors. She was weak and ordinary. Not to mention that even the barbarian warriors, who were known for their ferocity and toughness, were in awe of this shadow-like man. After a moment, Ye suddenly felt a chill on the top of her head. It was a hand that was gently placed on the top of her head. Why was the palm so cold, almost not like the flesh and blood of a human? At that moment, Ye even trembled for no reason. She closed her eyes and was very afraid. She even felt that it was not a hand that was pressing on her head, but a piece of gloomy white bone. "Do you hate me in your heart?" That calm, seemingly emotionless voice sounded in Ye's ears. Ye was stunned for a moment, and then immediately shook her head desperately. She was afraid that if she moved a little slower, this terrible and evil priest might make her suffer the most terrible punishment in the legends. Lu Chen looked at the terrified barbarian girl and wanted to say something, but after a moment, he secretly sighed in his heart. He thought to himself, what's going on? Didn't he say that he was indifferent to these barbarians and had no interest in them? Why did he suddenly feel that his heart had softened? He withdrew his hand, turned around, and walked back to his original place and sat down. After a moment, she heard him say, "This time, you probably know the people of the Divine Wood clan who came with you, right?" Yi breathed a sigh of relief after his hand left her head, but after hearing this, she became a little nervous. At the same time, she had a faint feeling that the fate of her clan was about to be decided. She hesitated for a moment and then said carefully, "I know them all, Lord Priest. What do you want to do?" Lu Chen raised his head slightly and looked at her. Yi was shocked and quickly prostrated on the ground, saying, "Lord Priest, don't be angry. I just want to help you. Now, I have been sent to serve you. No matter what, you can ask me to do it, and I will do my best to do it." Roar. Lu Chen did not make any response, but at this moment, a low roar suddenly came from behind Yi. A huge shadow suddenly appeared and covered her, with a strong murderous aura. Leaves screamed and turned her head. What she saw was a bloody mouth, and then a huge ferocious wolf head. The sharp fangs were about to pierce her face, and a pair of big eyes like copper bells were staring at her fiercely. It seemed that the next moment, it would pounce on her and swallow her in one bite. Ye's body went limp, and she almost fainted. Her body could not help but curl back desperately. After a while, she reacted. Wasn't this the huge black wolf that had been following the mysterious priest? Before, it was already very frightening, but now that it was so close to the giant wolf, its ferocious and terrifying aura was even more frightening. Yi had no doubt that this demon wolf must have killed countless people and eaten countless flesh and blood. Could it be that the purpose of me being placed next to this priest was to become the wolf's food? There was no trace of blood on the barbarian girl's face, and she looked like she was about to be scared to death. At this moment, Lu Chen frowned and said, "Enough, Atsu, you're too free, aren't you?" The huge black wolf that was baring its fangs and looking like the most terrifying monster in the world suddenly shrank back. Its original ferocious appearance disappeared in the blink of an eye, and then it returned to its lazy appearance. It grinned and called out, then slowly walked to Lu Chen's side and lay down. It opened its mouth and yawned, but it rested its head on Lu Chen's leg, and then narrowed its eyes again. Yi, who felt that she had escaped from death, slowly recovered after a long while. She gasped and once again knelt on the ground in front of Lu Chen with some difficulty. Lu Chen looked at her helplessly. After a moment of silence, he said, "Are you all right, Yi whispered in a trembling voice, I'm fine. Lu Chen sighed and said, if you're tired, you can go back and have a rest for a while. Yi shook her head and said, the leader who led me here just now said that I will be your servant from now on. From today on, I will eat, drink, and live here. I can't go anywhere. Lu Chen was speechless for a moment. After a moment, he said, then do as you please. Yi bowed her head and agreed. After a while, she looked around again, and then quietly got up and walked to the side to start cleaning up the house. Lu Chen didn't care about her. Anyway, there was nothing important in this house. After waiting for a while, he suddenly seemed to think of something, and then asked Yi casually, by the way, among your people this time, how many warriors or adult men are there who can fight? Ye's body trembled, and her face suddenly turned pale. Lu Chen waited for a while, but found that he didn't get the answer he wanted. He frowned and looked at her, what's wrong with you? Yi suddenly ran over, knelt in front of Lu Chen, and then kowtowed desperately. Her eyes were full of tears, and she cried, Your Excellency, I beg you to let my people go. As long as you don't let them die, I'm willing to do whatever you want Yi to do. With that, she seemed to have made a difficult decision. She suddenly put her hand on her animal skin clothes, and was about to tear them off. Chapter 324. With a crisp sound, Yezi exerted her strength and directly tore off more than half of her animal skin clothes. Lu Chen only felt a sudden flash of white light in front of his eyes. At that moment, even a calm and steady person like him was dumbfounded. He stared at Yezi with her mouth half open. For a moment, he was stunned and didn't know what to say or do. He just sat there motionlessly. Atsu, who was originally a little lazy beside Lu Chen, seemed to be shocked. With a quiver, he turned over and jumped up. He looked up at Yezi, who had suddenly revealed half of her body. He stared at her with a pair of dog eyes and didn't make a sound for a long time. The atmosphere in the stone house instantly fell into silence. Yezi closed her eyes tightly, her cheeks flushed. Her heart was shy and indignant, and there was also a kind of desperation, as if she was sacrificing herself for justice. However, after waiting for a long time, she suddenly woke up from her inexplicable emotions, but found that it seemed that the expected thing did not happen. Almost all of the barbarian tribes in the wilderness were dominated by men and women. Especially the barbarian women who had been defeated, captured, and turned into female slaves. They had no dignity to speak of. They were often reduced to the playthings of their new masters, or become tools to give birth to future generations. In fact, as long as the barbarian women who fell into such a situation did not want to die, they often hoped to have children. As long as they had offspring, then for the sake of the children, their situation would be improved, or at least they could get a relatively formal identity. In Yezi's original expectation, she was ready to give up her dignity and sacrifice her body. Under normal circumstances, if the opponent was a barbarian, he would most likely have rushed over to push her down and ravage her. But the strange thing was that this situation did not happen now. She stood there, feeling that her surroundings seemed to be empty. No one was approaching, and there was no sound. There was only a trace of wind passing over her white skin, bringing a slight chill. Yezi opened her eyes and found that the black-robed priest in front of her had turned around. Instead, his huge black wolf pet was still staring at her. Its pair of fierce eyes were full of surprise and doubt. Sir. Yi didn't know what was wrong with this mysterious and terrifying black-robed priest. Why didn't he act like a normal barbarian man? Could it be that he was a great and terrifying priest who possessed the power of the legendary black fire witchcraft, so he was different from the other barbarians? But, as a man, his physiological structure should be the same and normal as the barbarians. Ye's imagination began to run wild. At the same time, he was a little shocked and afraid. He was worried that if his actions did not tempt the priest, and instead angered him, wouldn't it bring a great disaster to his clansmen? Thinking of this, Yi felt her legs turn to jelly. It had to be admitted that Yi was not a very knowledgeable and capable barbarian. In fact, she was just an ordinary barbarian girl in the Divine Wood tribe. At most, her beauty and skin were passable, but she had grown up in the tribe and only knew some basic rules of the barbarian world. Given time, if nothing had changed, she would have found the strongest and bravest warrior in the tribe and married him. Then, she would serve him wholeheartedly and bear his children. When her husband went to war, she would worry and pray for him. When he returned safely, she would be filled with joy. She would work hard day and night, living an ordinary life. Until one night this year, when the terrifying shadow of the black-robed priest covered the sky and the sun. When the terrifying shadow demon descended from the sky, the Black Fire tribe was invaded by the witchcraft warriors. Then, the Divine Wood tribe, which had lasted for many years, perished. She and many other clansmen became the black-robed priest's captives. She should have hated him. In fact, deep down in her heart, she still loathed and hated this person. However, fear was a stronger emotion in her heart. That night, it overwhelmed everything else. She didn't even dare to have any thoughts of hatred in front of this man. According to the legends, the shamans and priests were omnipotent, and some could even read people's minds. How is he going to deal with me? It's fine if I die, but don't drag others down with me. Just when Yezi's mind was in a mess and all kinds of distracting thoughts came one after another, Lu Chen coughed softly and said, "You, put on your clothes first." Yezi was stunned for a moment. She was a little embarrassed at first, but then she felt a burst of joy in her heart. From the tone of the priest, it seemed that he wasn't angry. However, it was said that these big shots were temperamental. No one could be sure what they would do in the next moment. Yezi hurriedly agreed, and then hurriedly put on the animal skin clothes that she had just torn off. The only thing that was a little awkward was that the animal skin clothes were originally sewn. Just now, she had the determination to tear it apart regardless of everything. Even if she died here today, it didn't matter at all, so when she tore it, she didn't even think about what to do if she had to wear it again later. She saw that the animal skin clothes had been directly torn in half. No matter how Yezi tried to cover it, it was not secure. Either the front part fell off, or the back part was exposed. In the end, Yezi had no choice but to take off the two pieces of animal skin from the front and back with a red face. She directly tied them together with a knot, and then tied them above her chest, regardless of the part above her waist. Only then did she barely cover her body, and it was not too ugly. However, in this way, her petite figure was even more alluring. Lu Chen, who turned around and saw this scene, rolled his eyes in his heart. He thought that it was fortunate that this barbarian girl had a barbarian face and two small fangs that were similar to that of a beast. Otherwise, the temptation was really not small. But in any case, even if Lu Chen was not a gentleman for so many years, and had done many shady things, he still had no interest in a barbarian woman. So, after glancing at Yezi's exquisite body, he turned his eyes away, frowned and said to Yezi, "I just want to ask, how many warriors are left in your tribe now? Why do you look like the sky is falling down?" Yezi's eyes were red, and there were faint tears in them. She knelt on the ground again and said, "I beg you, Your Excellency, please let my people go." Lu Chen sighed, walked to her and sat down, saying, "What are you thinking in your heart? Tell me clearly." Yezi hesitated for a moment, but still lowered her head and said. It turned out that in the southern wilderness, because the barbarians were fierce and warlike, there were often tribal wars in the past. Since there was war, there was naturally blood, death, and captives. The barbarians were not polite to the captives. With their fierce nature, one could easily imagine the fate of those captives. The women could be divided up like property. If the men were not tortured to death, they would be forced to do some extremely dangerous work. Or they would be forced to charge at the front lines in the next battle. They would be used as cannon fodder to exhaust the enemy's strength. Yezi naturally knew these things. In fact, she did not have much hope, but on the night of the extinction of the tribe, Lu Qin gave them hope, saying that they should be treated equally and become a part of the Black Fire tribe. This was naturally very different from the treatment of captives in most barbarians' minds. But it was this little bit of hope, coupled with the oppression of the tragic fate of their families, that led to so many people being forced to surrender. Yezi had just heard Lu Chen's words, not including women and children, but only the number of adult men. This immediately triggered the most terrifying thought in her heart, and she immediately lost control. After listening to the barbarian girl lying on the ground in front of him, intermittently sobbing from time to time, Lu Chen did not know whether to laugh or cry. He shook his head and said with a wry smile, "You've misunderstood. I didn't mean that." Yezi's body stiffened, and she immediately raised her head to look at the black-robed priest. Her eyes were filled with surprise, and it seemed that even the hidden hatred seemed to have faded a lot. Lu Chen waved his hand and said, "I have no intention of going back on what I said to you. As long as I am here, I will naturally do it. You can also say these words to your people when you go back." Yezi nodded repeatedly and said, I will. Thank you, Your Excellency, thank you." Lu Chen snorted and said, "Now you should be relieved. Now can you tell me how many men there are in your Divine Wood tribe?" Yezi did not answer directly. She looked a little hesitant. Lu Chen said with some amusement, "Do you have a brain or not? I'm just asking you in passing. Do you think I won't know if you don't tell me? Believe it or not, I can go out and find a few leaders of the Black Fire tribe and ask them directly." Yezi thought that it was true, and immediately became a little discouraged. She could only say with some embarrassment, "About 40 people." Lu Chen was a little surprised, but then he understood. Of course, not all of them were the warriors of the Divine Wood tribe in the past. There should be a lot of them just to make up the numbers. He pondered for a moment and waved his hand, saying, "Go and call those men over." Yezi was a little worried again, but after seeing Lu Chen's expression, she did not dare to say anything more. She could only agree and go out. And after watching her leave, Lu Chen subconsciously felt a sense of relief. The burst of dazzling white just now was dazzling. It was really rare to see a barbarian woman with such good skin. At this moment, Hei Lang suddenly let out a low growl. Lu Chen glanced at it and said, "What are you doing? Behave." Atsu looked at him with a look of contempt. Lu Chen coughed dryly and turned around, saying, "I was stunned just now." "Stunned, do you understand? I was stunned, so I didn't mean to stare." Roar. Lu Chen ignored it and walked slowly to the side. Then he muttered in a low voice, "I didn't expect it to be so big." Chapter 325. When Yezi came out of the mysterious black-robed priest's house, she was seen by many people in the Black Fire tribe's camp. Then, almost everyone saw her disheveled appearance. It couldn't be helped. When she went in, she was wearing a complete set of clothes from her neck to her waist, but when she came out, she could only barely cover her chest. Even if one were to say that nothing had happened, one would have to believe it. However, perhaps because of Lu Chen's recent reputation, and the fact that the barbarians generally revered the priest, no one really stepped forward or loudly discussed anything. Everyone just watched the barbarian girl walk away with complicated emotions, and then began to whisper to each other. Of course, Yezi could feel the strange gazes of the people around her. She blushed again and felt a little annoyed. But when she looked down at her torn clothes that could only be tied together, she could only walk away silently. These clothes were torn by him. If he had to blame someone, he really didn't know who to blame. Just like that, she walked quickly with her head down, and soon returned to the place where the Black Fire tribe had settled the Divine Wood tribe captives. After being exterminated, they became captives under someone else's roof, and even their survival depended on the mood of others. The Divine Wood tribe members here were naturally very sensitive. The news that Hui Yen had come to pick Yezi and give her to Lu Chen as a maid had already spread throughout the Divine Wood tribe. So when they saw Yezi suddenly return, a large group of people immediately surrounded her. Most of the people walking in front were women, and most of them were slightly older. There were 1 or 2 old men beside them, and it seemed that they had some experience or reputation among the Divine Wood tribe members. These people obviously wanted to ask Yezi if there was any progress outside, and if the black-robed priest intended to keep his promise. But soon, everyone's eyes suddenly fell on Yezi. Looking at the girl who was still fully clothed when she left in the morning, and now revealing her fair waist and smooth and alluring shoulders, while her clothes only covered her chest, many people's gazes immediately changed. After a moment of silence, a group of women rushed forward and squeezed the other old men and men to the back, surrounding Yezi tightly in the middle. In an instant, countless questions rushed into Yezi's ears. Yezi, what happened to you? Did that priest sleep with you? Poor child, that beast must be very fierce. Look, even his clothes have been torn in half. Does your body hurt? How pitiful. Come over here. Auntie will give you a hug. Yezi felt her head buzzing and almost dizzy, but she still heard some of the questions in the noise. She quickly replied, No, I'm fine. I really didn't, sigh, such a good girl, she should have been married to our tribe's warriors and given birth to our children. Who would have thought that she would be defiled by the Black Fire tribe's bastards? Before Yezi could finish her words, she was interrupted by a wave of comforting voices filled with sadness, pity, and heartache. The barbarian aunties around her kept comforting her, pushing her around and holding her in their arms, telling her not to be sad, not to be sad. This was inevitable for a woman in her life, and it didn't matter if she was bitten by a dog when she went out for a walk. Moreover, now that the Sacred Wood tribe had fallen into such a miserable state, they could only depend on the Black Fire tribe. The black-robed priest's position in the Black Fire tribe was not to be underestimated. Having a woman serve him was a good thing for everyone. At first, Yezi wanted to continue to argue, but after being interrupted several times and hearing the words of the people around her, she suddenly lowered her head, and her eyes were a little red. It was still noisy around her. Everyone seemed to be comforting her. Later, a few respectable elderly people squeezed in and solemnly told Yezi that they hoped she would be more open-minded and not be sad. They hoped that she would serve the black-robed priest carefully and endure any grievances. If she was sad, she could come back and tell everyone. Then it would be fine. At least in this way, everyone would be able to live a better life. Later, Yezi cried and shed tears. Surrounded by her clansmen and surrounded by seemingly warm hugs, her tears inexplicably flowed like pearls with a broken string. She couldn't stop even if she wanted to. Yezi went back to change her clothes, and then returned to the stone house where Lu Chen was. But at this moment, she was accompanied by a group of men from the Sacred Wood tribe. The barbarians of the Black Fire tribe who noticed the commotion here were quickly attracted over. After all, there were suddenly so many foreigners in the tribe's camp. Although the higher-ups had said that they would merge into one after the annexation, it didn't mean that the Black Fire tribe would accept these people of different surnames from the Sacred Wood tribe. Moreover, there didn't seem to be such an example in the southern wilderness since ancient times. Among the crowd of onlookers from the Black Fire tribe, there were many strong adult men. They were the Black Fire barbarian warriors. Although they looked at Lu Chen's stone house with awe, when they looked at the Sacred Wood tribe captives, their gazes were not very friendly. There was even some hostility and vigilance. After all, they had been fighting to the death not long ago. But what happened next was beyond most people's expectations. After Lu Chen walked out of the stone house, he didn't avoid the onlookers and directly looked at the captives. He pointed at them and eliminated about half of the old and weak, leaving about 20 of the strongest men. After that, Lu Chen returned to the stone house with the huge black wolf and Yezi. The people who were eliminated went back first, leaving the remaining 20 people standing outside the house at a loss. After a while, footsteps sounded in the stone house again, but this time it was Yezi who walked out alone. Her expression looked a little complicated, but she was generally calm. Under the gaze of the crowd, she walked towards the 20 people and pointed at one of them, asking him to follow her into the stone house. At this time, not only were the remaining people bewildered, even the onlookers from the Black Fire tribe did not understand what the black-robed priest was going to do. They all whispered to each other. But just as they were whispering to each other, an inexplicable aura suddenly emanated from the dim stone house. Although it was not as exaggerated as the sky changing color, and although there were no abnormalities or obvious changes, everyone seemed to feel their hearts beating violently. Then, for a moment, the stone house seemed to be completely dark. It was shrouded in incomparably deep darkness, and in the deepest part of the dark shadow, there seemed to be a flame suddenly burning. No one could see the flame. It was just a feeling. Perhaps it was because the flame was black. Everyone quietened down and stared at the dark stone house. After waiting for a while, it seemed like a long time. Finally, the darkness seemed to slowly fade, and after a while, a figure slowly walked out. It was the divine wood warrior who was called in by Yezi. At this moment, the strong barbarian warrior looked a little defeated, and his expression was a little complicated. He looked a little nervous, a little worried, and a little excited. Moreover, he seemed to be relieved. All kinds of strange and contradictory feelings appeared on this barbarian at the same time. No one could figure out what he had experienced just now. And before the surrounding people could gather around to ask, another set of footsteps came from the house. Soon, the barbarian girl, Yezi, walked out again. After looking around expressionlessly, she pointed at another barbarian waiting outside and asked him to follow her in. When Yezi and the somewhat uneasy man entered the stone house again, the surrounding divine wood warriors immediately surrounded the first barbarian warrior and began to ask questions. The surrounding Black Fire tribe people also stretched their necks to get closer to them. They were also very curious. In the crowd, the barbarian warrior with a complicated expression was silent for a moment. Suddenly, he stretched out his hand and pulled open the front of his shirt, revealing his strong chest. Immediately, the surrounding people's gazes fell on his bulging muscles. Suddenly, everyone became silent. Where the crowd's line of sight could reach, there was now a totem symbol that was shaped like a blazing flame on the vital point of his chest. The totem symbol was completely black, deep and murderous, and it looked as if it would really burst into flames at any moment. That was the totem symbol of the Black Fire tribe. With the appearance of this symbol, there was a sudden uproar in the crowd further away. Several people, almost all of them warriors of the Black Fire tribe, cried out in surprise. In the middle of their foreheads, there was also the same rune. It was the same rune that Lu Qin used to cast the Black Fire witchcraft to demonize them. Chapter 326. The appearance of the Black Fire rune on the Divine Wood tribe warrior caused an even greater uproar and surprise among the Black Fire tribe compared to the group of captives. Everyone whispered to each other, anger and surprise on their faces. At the same time, a few strong barbarian warriors even turned around and ran into the distance. After a while, a group of people surrounded Hui Yen and walked over with large strides. The group of people in front quickly felt that something was wrong and quickly made way for them, including the group of Divine Wood tribe captives. Although there was still a hint of unwillingness on their faces, there was also a hint of fear on their faces. Most of them lowered their heads and retreated to the side. People who had just been exterminated and captured would never have the courage to resist. Moreover, when this group of aggressive Black Fire tribe warriors walked over, each of them looked like a fiend. At the same time, many people noticed that some of them had blades and axes hanging on their bodies, intentionally or unintentionally. In the world of the barbarians, knives and axes only had one use, and that was to kill. Hui Yen stood in front of this group of warriors with a solemn expression. His face looked a little gloomy, while the other Black Fire tribe warriors all had different expressions. There was reverence, anger, fear, and even a little worry. However, when they felt a dark aura surging out from the stone house, almost everyone stopped in their tracks. That was the power of witchcraft. Every warrior here, especially those who had experienced the battle with the Divine Wood tribe, could clearly feel it. They also understood the danger of this power more than the other tribesmen who did not know the origin of this power. Huiyan's face was dark as he stood outside the dark door, staring into the depths of the darkness. His expression was indifferent, making it impossible for others to see what he was thinking. However, they could faintly see that the depths of his pupils were slightly contracting. After an unknown amount of time, the powerful dark aura finally faded. After a while, just like before, he sent out another man who had been marked with the Black Fire rune. She was about to point out the next person when a tall and burly figure suddenly appeared in front of her. Huiyan's hill-like body stood in front of Yi like a giant beast. Yi subconsciously took 2 steps back, a trace of fear flashing across her face. However, Huiyan did not pay too much attention to this barbarian girl. His gaze never left the dark stone house. At this moment, he only casually said to Yi in a low voice, "Lead the way, I want to see him." When he said this, Huiyan's expression was not particularly fierce, but there was an inviolable aura in his tone. Yi secretly swallowed her saliva and then agreed in a low voice. She did not dare to call anyone else and just turned around to lead Huiyan into the stone house. Following behind Huiyan were Tai Xiong, He Niu, and a group of his trusted warriors. Seeing this, they also wanted to follow, but when Huiyan was about to reach the doorstep, his body paused for a moment, then he turned around and suddenly ordered, "You guys wait outside." After saying this, he directly walked into the stone house without saying a word. Iron Bear, Black Bull, and the rest of the Black Fire warriors looked at each other. However, after a while, they finally spread out in 2s and 3s around the stone house. Then, intentionally or unintentionally, they surrounded the stone house and the 20 Divine Wood warriors outside. The moment he walked into the stone house, Huiyan suddenly felt a feeling of darkness in front of him. After a while, when his eyes gradually adapted to the darkness, he saw a figure sitting in front of the stone house. At the same time, there was an extremely large figure lying on the ground beside him. A pair of slightly green eyes glanced at him. Needless to say, it was naturally Lu Chen and Natsu. Yi walked up nervously and hurriedly, kneeling in front of the black-robed priest. When he stammered and wanted to explain something, Lu Chen casually waved his hand and said indifferently, "No need to say anything. This is our tribe's warrior leader. He can come whenever he wants." Huiyan's expression was grave and stern. He did not reply. Instead, he slowly walked over and stopped a few feet in front of Lu Chen. Huiyan's sturdiness were extremely outstanding even among the barbarian race's warriors. Originally, his stature was much larger than Lu Chen's. At this moment, Lu Chen was sitting on the ground, while he was standing. The difference between the two of them seemed to be even greater. It was as if an angry giant beast was staring at a small beast in front of it. Yi knelt to the side and looked at this somewhat tense and stiff scene. For some reason, his heart suddenly jumped to his throat. He was so nervous that he did not dare to breathe. However, Lu Chen's expression seemed to be very calm. He only lightly raised his head and looked at Huiyan. He then pointed at the seat in front of him and said, "Sit." Huiyan did not comply and sat down. He coldly looked at Lu Chen and said in a low voice, "Why did you do this?" Lu Chen didn't answer him immediately. Instead, he silently sat where he was. After a while, he didn't look at the giant like Huiyan standing not far away from him. Instead, he faintly said, "Ever since you were young, didn't your father, the chief of the tribe, teach you to respect and observe some etiquette towards the tribe's priests?" As he said this, the atmosphere in the dark stone house suddenly became a bit more tense. A chill that seemed to be able to freeze one's bones began to spread in this place. Ye's whole body began to tremble slightly. She subconsciously curled up her body desperately. At the same time, in the depths of her heart, an idea suddenly flashed like a flash of lightning. These two people, the two most powerful people in the Black Fire tribe, seem to be at odds with each other. You go out first. Just as Ye's mind was in a state of panic and confusion, a voice suddenly sounded in front of her. It was Huoyan who suddenly said this. His voice was low and calm. When he spoke, he did not even look at Ye's direction. It was obvious that he did not care about this divine wood tribe girl at all. Yi looked at Lu Chen with trepidation. When she saw him lightly wave his hand, she jumped up as if she had been pardoned and quickly walked out of the stone house. The moment she stepped out of the door, when light shone on her from outside, Yi somehow had the illusion that she had returned to the human world from hell. She let out a long sigh of relief. But very quickly, she found that there were many barbarian warriors standing around her. Each of them had a cold expression on their faces as they looked in her direction. On their hands, the sharp edges of the blades and axes were flashing with cold light. Ye's heart that had just warmed up suddenly turned cold again. Then, it sank again. In the stone house, when there were no outsiders present, the atmosphere actually began to ease a little. Even the giant wolf Atsu that had been snuggling up to Lu Chen did not show any hostility or vigilance towards Huoyan. Huoyan silently sat down in front of Lu Chen. After which, he raised his head to look at the latter. Very quickly, he discovered that Lu Chen was still wearing the white bone mask. His brows involuntarily furrowed as his expression turned a little ugly. Why are you wearing that again? Lu Chen took off the white bone mask from his face and placed it at the side. He said, when I inscribe the black fire runes on the bodies of those divine wood tribe people, I need them to not be too resistant, otherwise it will be very troublesome. I found that wearing this thing was quite useful, probably because this mask was passed down from their ancestors. When they saw me wearing it, they would feel relaxed, and they wouldn't be too hostile towards me, which made it easier for them to cast their spells. Huoyan snorted and said, why do you want to use this kind of spell on them? You should know that this is a power that belongs to our Black Fire tribe. By the end of his sentence, Huoyan had already raised his voice, showing the anger in his heart. Lu Chen did not look too surprised, nor did he speak up to defend himself. He only looked at him indifferently and said, I told you before, the Black Fire tribe's warriors are too few, not enough to support our ambition of reviving the Black Fire tribe as soon as possible. Therefore, I can only find another way. The 20 people outside are also strong barbarian warriors. After receiving the Black Fire runes, they will also become valiant warriors. In this way, the strength of the Black Fire tribe will increase by another level. Huoyan said angrily, nonsense. You're being reckless. In the future, every time you destroy a tribe, are you going to steal their warriors to do this? Yes. Lu Chen said calmly, didn't I already tell you about this idea? This is the most effective way to increase the strength of the Black Fire tribe in a short period of time. Huoyan took a deep breath and shook his head, saying, but I also told you that this method is not appropriate. You should know that if there are too many of these foreign tribes with the power of demonization, even more than the warriors of our Black Fire tribe, when the time comes, what should we do? Chapter 327. Backlash? Lu Chen raised his eyes slightly and looked at the solemn Huoyan. He asked in a slightly astonished tone. Huoyan frowned and said, what, am I wrong? Lu Chen pondered for a moment and said, you're thinking too much. Firstly, the demonization of warriors is a kind of witchcraft. If I don't use it, they won't be able to obtain that kind of power. Huoyan's expression did not relax. He stared at Lu Chen and said, but if you continue to do this, there will be more and more warriors of the foreign races. Is there no risk? Once they reach a certain time, their numbers are too many, or they suddenly turn on us after demonizing on the battlefield, what will we do at that time? Lu Qin said indifferently, this is the second thing I wanted to tell you earlier. That black flame rune just happens to be able to control these divine wood race members. Once someone has any disloyal thoughts, just by relying on this thing, I have a way to instantly kill them. Huo Yan was startled. His face revealed an astonished expression. He said, what? The black flame seal pattern has this kind of effect? Lu Qin looked at him with a smile that was not a smile. He said, what do you think? If it wasn't like that, why would I spend so much effort to slowly cast the curse one by one? Right, I forgot to tell you. The true name of the black flame seal pattern isn't the black flame seal pattern. It is a variant of witchcraft. Its original name is the black flame curse. He smiled. His smile looked calm and serene, but there seemed to be an indescribable throbbing in his eyes at that moment. That isn't a seal pattern. It's a kind of curse. The atmosphere in the stone house suddenly became a bit colder. No one spoke for a while. Then, after a while, Huo Yan suddenly stood up. Standing before Lu Qin, his tall stature looked extremely out of place. Furthermore, there was a faint, biting cold murderous aura emanating from his body. Lu Qin seemed to have sensed something, and he slowly stood up and said, what's wrong? Huo Yan looked deeply at him, his gaze exceptionally sharp, like two daggers staring at Lu Qin. Then, he slowly said, did you cast this curse on me and my black fire warriors? Lu Qin didn't seem to be frightened by the barbarian's murderous aura. He even smiled faintly and said calmly, I only know of one type of black flame curse. Of course it's the same type. Clang! A crisp sound rang out. It was Huo Yan's sudden growl. He reached out his hand and pulled out the dagger that was hanging on his waist. The bright light of the dagger was pointed at Lu Qin. On the other side, the giant wolf Atsu, who was originally a little lazy, suddenly jumped up. With a roar, it bared its sharp fangs at Huo Yan and pretended to pounce on him. In the dark stone house, the atmosphere suddenly became tense. The two sides seemed to be confronting each other, and the situation seemed to be on the verge of exploding. Huo Yan didn't pay attention to the growling Atsu beside Lu Qin. Instead, he stared at Lu Qin and gripped the dagger in his hand tightly. He said word by word, why? Lu Qin shook his head and said, no reason. I've already told you, the black flame curse is just like this. I can use the fire god staff to cast a variant spell to demonize you and increase your strength for a short period of time. But in the end, this kind of curse is still a curse. It naturally has the power to kill. He looked up at Huo Yan and said, it seems like you don't like it. Huo Yan's breathing was slightly hurried, his fangs crossed. He growled and said, who would like to have this kind of thing on their body? If that's the case, the lives of me and the other warriors will be in your hands, I can help you get rid of it now. Lu Qin suddenly interrupted him and said calmly. Huo Yan was stunned for a moment, as if he couldn't react in time. He looked at Lu Qin in shock. Lu Qin said, you, and the other black fire warriors, if you need it, I can help you get rid of this black flame curse. But correspondingly, you will lose the power of demonization on the battlefield. Huo Yan's expression changed intensely, but he still didn't say anything. Lu Qin looked at this barbarian man, a strange light flashed in the depths of his eyes. He said, I think you're just afraid that I can control everyone's life and death. My power is too great, and I can even control the tribe? In fact, I still stand by my words. Your barbarian tribe is not worthy of my attention. I don't care about the things that you value so much. If you're afraid, give me the way to return to the north. I will get rid of all your curses now, then give up everything here and leave by myself. From then on, I will have nothing to do with your black fire tribe. Huo Yan looked at Lu Qin. Lu Qin didn't look away either, calmly looking at him. After a while, Huo Yan's expression changed. Suddenly, he turned his head away. The anger on his face quickly dissipated, and he slowly put away the blade in his hand. After a while, he said in a low voice, "Let me think about it first." Lu Chen smiled mockingly, then his expression returned to normal and he nodded. Hui Yen turned and walked out. Just as he was about to reach the door, he suddenly squatted down and turned back to Lu Chen. "Don't tell anyone about this secret." Lu Chen nodded and said, "I know." Hui Yen looked at him deeply, then turned and walked out. The day's tense atmosphere gradually calmed down as Hui Yen silently walked out of the black-robed priest's stone house and took away all the Black Fire tribe warriors. As for Lu Chen, he didn't seem to be affected by this matter. After Hui Yen left, he continued to summon people into the stone house and cast the mysterious Black Fire seal on them. No one knew what happened between Hui Yen and the black-robed priest in the dark stone house, or what they talked about. Iron Bear, Black Bull, and the other Black Fire tribe warriors were very curious about this. They secretly asked Hui Yen a few times, but Hui Yen kept a straight face and didn't say anything. With the help of the Black Fire tribe's powerful divine weapon, the Fire God's Staff, the black-robed priest, Lu Chen, spent a day's work and finally cast the Black Fire seal on all 20 people. After this, the abnormally tired Lu Chen drove them away. He only said that he would send Yi to summon them again in 2 days, and that they would know what he was going to do next. This answer obviously didn't satisfy the 20 divine wood warriors, but facing the black-robed priest, no matter how fierce they were, they didn't dare to be impudent. In the end, they could only leave dispiritedly. However, many people secretly warned Yi to act according to the situation and try to find out what this terrifying black-robed priest was thinking. Yes, for this goal, they must do everything they can, although they didn't say it explicitly, the meaning was very clear. Leaf also understood, but she did not seem to have any more emotional fluctuations. At most, she just nodded silently. Finally, after sending everyone off, she slowly walked back to the dark stone house. Ever since Lu Chen brought Atsu to live here, the stone house had never been lit with any torches or candles. It seemed that this mysterious black-robed priest was very disgusted with things like flames. When this thought flashed through Ye's mind, she couldn't help but be a little surprised. She thought to herself, "Your tribe is called Black Fire, and you worship a fire god. Why would the tribe priest hate flames and light?" But for some reason, when she left the familiar crowd outside and returned to this dark place, when the darkness and shadows quietly blocked the light behind her and the eyes of those people, Yi suddenly felt a sense of relief. She actually seemed to be relieved from the bottom of her heart. She was shocked by this feeling, and then she quickly felt a sense of guilt. She secretly clenched her teeth and scolded herself. "What's wrong with you?" A voice suddenly came from the front. It was the black-robed priest's deep voice in the dark corner. He still sounded a little tired, but he seemed to have noticed something. His eyes penetrated the darkness and fell on Yi. There seemed to be some light in his eyes. Yi was startled and quickly bowed her head. "I'm fine." "That's good," Lu Chen said lightly and then closed his eyes. It seemed that he didn't want to pursue the matter, or perhaps he had no interest in the feelings of these barbarians. Yi, who was a little nervous, was startled for a moment. After a while, she finally understood that her new master seemed to be too lazy to talk to her. She was a little embarrassed and a little cramped. After turning her head to look around, she wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. It seemed that she wanted to stand up and lean against the corner. Lu Chen suddenly said, "You sleep here." Yi glanced at him and found that the place Lu Chen pointed to was the farthest wall from her. She was relieved, but soon she remembered the important task entrusted to her by the villagers before she came here. Those eager eyes, so many people's hope of life and death, all seemed to depend on her alone, even if it might make her sink into the terrible hell to spy on the most terrible person in the world. Yi felt a little cold, but she still gritted her teeth and quietly cried for herself in the deepest part of her heart. Then she squeezed out a smile and slowly approached the black-robed priest. Your Excellency, do you need me to serve you? Lu Chen, who had closed his eyes to rest, frowned slightly and opened his eyes again. He found that Yi, who was approaching him, was trembling slightly, but it seemed that she had summoned up her courage and slowly reached out to untie her clothes. Lu Chen was silent. After a moment, he said, "Don't smile. I think your smile is ugly." Chapter 328. Ye's hands suddenly froze in front of her chest, and then she looked at the black-robed priest with shame and anger. However, Lu Chen obviously didn't mean to pay attention to her. He just waved his hand and said, "Go sleep over there, don't disturb me." "Yes." Yi answered in a low voice. She didn't know why, but she suddenly felt relieved, and the anger she had before disappeared. Even when she looked at Lu Chen, she felt that this black-robed priest didn't seem to be as terrible and disgusting as she had imagined. However, memories quickly surfaced in her mind. That day, in the old tribal camp, many of the clansmen she had known since she was young had died under the hands of this black-robed priest, died in that terrifying black fire. That painful howl was still reminding her, making Yi suddenly feel very ashamed of her weakness just now. She lowered her head and walked back to the corner of the wall that belonged to her, and unexpectedly found that there were 2 or 3 animal skin mattresses there. She was startled for a moment, and looked back, only to see that Lu Chen's figure had merged with the darkness, as if he had become a part of the shadow, making it hard to see him clearly. She stared at that side for a moment, and then gritted her teeth, gently moved the animal skin mattresses to the side, and then lay down against the wall. The ground and the wall were very cold, but the animal skin mattresses not far away looked unusually warm. Ye's body trembled slightly, but in the end, she still closed her eyes. She had seen and heard too many things that day, and also suffered a lot of stimulation and shock. At first, she felt very awake and couldn't fall asleep, but after lying down for a while, her eyelids started to droop, and she unknowingly fell asleep. Many people saw the scene of Huayan rushing in angrily that day. Some were surprised, and some were secretly delighted. But in the end, Huayan went into the stone house alone and stayed for a long time. When he came out again, he didn't say a word, and left with his men. This also made many people who were originally nervous, or wanted to see a good show, shocked. In the following days, with the changes in the tribe's camp and various situations, the deeds of Lu Chen, the black-robed priest, began to be known by everyone, immediately shocking the entire Black Fire tribe. 3 days after Huayan left Lu Chen's place, the chief of the Black Fire tribe, Huahu, found him. The father and son had a serious conversation. At the same time, there were also 6 elders who were highly respected in the tribe. They were elders that Huayan had to greet whenever he met them. In this conversation, Flaming Tiger straightforwardly expressed his distrust of Lu Chen to his son. At the same time, he sternly warned him that there had never been an outsider who had become a priest of the Black Fire tribe, and Lu Chen's behavior after becoming a priest was incompatible with the behavior of all the great priests in the history of the tribe. This person is not of our race, so he definitely has ulterior motives. He was definitely not an emissary of the fire god. He was a minion of the devil. If we don't get rid of this black-robed priest, then our Black Fire tribe will perish in the hands of this terrifying human. The other 6 elders in the meeting all agreed, either solemnly or tactfully persuading Huayan, telling him not to be muddle-headed and to wake up as soon as possible. Everyone said that our Black Fire tribe has lived in this wasteland for thousands of years, following the rules of our ancestors. We have always lived well, and there is no need for any changes. That black-robed priest has gone against the rules, committed outrages, and even used the witchcraft of the Black Fire tribe on those captives. Such vile behavior will soon provoke the wrath of the fire god, and he may even send down divine punishment. When that time comes, won't we both be sinners of the tribe? When he reached the end of his speech, Huahu stood in front of his son. His aged face seemed to be somewhat distorted from his emotions. He grabbed Huiyan's arm and said in a hoarse voice, "I'm old, son. The position of tribe leader will be yours sooner or later. As long as you kill that human, I will immediately abdicate and hand over the position of tribe leader to you." From the beginning to the end, Huiyan, who had been unusually silent, finally stood up. But strangely, his face did not reveal the excited and sudden awakening expression that Huohu and the other elders wanted to see. This tall and sturdy barbarian was in the prime of his life. He was a barbarian in his prime. He was majestic and mighty, and had the ambition and meticulousness that ordinary men did not have. He could see further than them, and he stood taller than them. Occasionally, when he turned his head back, Huiyan would realize that he no longer had any companions by his side. There was a bit of pain and disappointment in the depths of his eyes, but his expression was still calm. He stood up in front of the most senior elders of the tribe, and said in front of his father, "Fire Tiger, you don't have to worry about these things in the future." After saying that, he ignored the astonished and angry gazes around him, turned around and walked out, leaving behind a room of angry elders and a suffocating atmosphere. Lu Chen only learned of this matter from Huiyan the next day at noon. When Huiyan came to find him, Lu Chen had just finished training the 20 strong divine wood warriors and let them go back first. The so-called training, of course, did not mean that Lu Chen would teach these barbarian warriors how to kill people or how to use weapons. Instead, it was to let these people familiarize themselves with the demonized state that he would enter after casting the spell, and how to better, well, actually, how to better kill people. Apart from this, Lu Chen also told all the divine wood warriors that when casting the demonized sorcery, he would also plant the world's most vicious curse on everyone's body. If anyone dared to betray him, they would be burned alive in the terrifying black flames. After death, even their souls would not be able to escape, let alone return to the embrace of their ancestors and gods. But as long as all of you listen to my orders and serve me loyally, as long as you achieve great merit, you will be able to remove this curse. At the same time, from this day onwards, all the divine wood warriors would be known as the Black Fire Guards, and would only listen to the orders of the black-robed priest. These words of course quickly spread throughout the entire Black Fire tribe, and at the same time caused a huge uproar. It also became the evidence that the elders of the Black Fire tribe increasingly hated Lu Chen. When the sun set that evening, when Huiyan sat with him in the stone house, this barbarian already looked somewhat disappointed. Lu Chen looked at him and said, "What's wrong, are you unable to bear it?" Huiyan waved his hand and closed his eyes as he leaned against the wall. After a while, he said, "I didn't expect Father and the other elders to be so short-sighted. They can't see at all why I want to push this matter forward." Lu Chen sighed, walked to his side and sat down, saying, "You're wrong." Huiyan opened his eyes and looked at him, saying, "What do you mean?" Lu Chen said, "You can see so much foresight and do so many daring things, that's because you are a unique and different barbarian. Among so many tribes in the wilderness, how many barbarians like you are there? You can't even find one in an ordinary tribe. Perhaps it's normal that they don't understand you." Huiyan smiled bitterly and said softly, "I just want to restore the glory of my ancestral tribe. I don't deserve such praise." He paused and frowned, saying, "Oh right, can you keep a low profile when dealing with those 20 Black Fire Guards? You know what the situation is now. Demonizing every day is like stabbing their hearts with a knife." Lu Chen shrugged, saying, "I can't help it, time is too tight." Huiyan was startled, saying, "What do you mean?" Lu Chen said indifferently, "In 3 days, Thunder Lizard, Ghost Fox and Mountain Spirit, you can choose one of these 3 tribes." Huiyan was shocked and stood up abruptly, saying, "What, how long has it been, you're going to fight?" Lu Chen said calmly and firmly, "The wilderness is so big, there are so many tribes, we don't have time to waste. Even you didn't expect us to start a war so soon, then, those 3 tribes definitely didn't expect it either." Huiyan didn't know what to say for a moment. After a while, he said, sometimes I feel that in the world, we barbarians are the most warlike, but compared to you, we are worlds apart." Lu Qin sneered. He turned around and walked into the depths of the darkness. At the same time, he said, "Stop pretending. Anyway, it's just blood and lives. In the wilderness, the victor is everything. You're the one who said that to me." Hua Yan was silent for a long time, then turned around and walked out of the stone house. As he walked in the open space of the tribe's camp, he occasionally raised his head to look at the dark sky, and suddenly saw a meteor flying across the night sky. That was a bold and unrestrained meteor, emitting a dazzling brilliance, instantly lighting up the entire starry sky, dazzling people's eyes. It flew passionately and fiercely, as if it was rushing forward recklessly, piercing through the darkness, until it finally disappeared into the depths of the distant darkness. Hua Yan stared blankly at the meteor's last light disappearing into the night sky, suddenly feeling a chill. When he lowered his head, he found that there was a slight gust of wind in the surroundings. In the darkness of the wilderness, the wind was blowing. Chapter 329. This can't go on any longer. An angry roar came from the house. Although it was suppressed, making the voice sound low, some echoes still floated out from the gap of the closed door. One could feel how angry the person in the house was at this moment. Standing outside the closed door were 4 or 5 barbarian males of the Black Fire tribe. They stood a distance away from each other and surrounded the house behind them. At the same time, they were vigilantly watching their surroundings. But in the dead of the night, no one would notice anything strange. Of course, the barbarian at the entrance had heard the angry roar just now. He turned his head to look, and his eyes were filled with worry. But soon, he also turned his head back, and cautiously kept his guard up, not allowing any outsiders to come close. At the same time, in the room behind the door, a lit lamp illuminated the people inside. In the middle of the room sat the old chief of the Black Fire tribe, Fire Tiger, with his grandson, Fire Eagle, by his side. Aside from the two of them, there were 6 other people in the house. They were the 6 tribal elders who had persuaded Hua Yan with Flaming Tiger. The one who had roared like a wild beast was one of the 6 elders. His name was Qi Shi. He didn't look young and was about the same age as Flaming Tiger. He had a head full of white hair and one of his 2 fangs was missing. However, this old man was a fierce general of the Black Fire tribe when he was young. He had been fighting for his entire life. Although he was old, his fierce and valiant aura was still there. At the same time, his irascible temper hadn't changed. At this moment, Qi Shi's furious roar reverberated within the room. He paced up and down within the room before abruptly turning around and saying loudly to Flaming Tiger, "Patriarch, did you hear what I said or not?" Flaming Tiger frowned and slightly nodded, indicating that he understood. But his eyebrows were still tightly knitted, as if he had a lot on his mind. Seeing Patriarch Hua Hu's appearance, the other elders had different expressions. After a while, another elder at the side with a slightly gentler expression pulled Qi Shi and said in a low voice, "All right, Patriarch knows what he's doing. Don't shout randomly. If your voice is too loud and is heard by others, they might run to tell Hua Yan or that black-robed priest, and there might be big trouble." Qi Shi snorted heavily, his face filled with anger and reluctance. However, it seemed that he was still somewhat fearful of the 2 people mentioned. Finally, he walked to the side and sat down. Only then did this elder, who had persuaded the irascible old barbarian, turn around and look at Hua Hu. He asked in a low voice, "Patriarch, what are your plans now?" The wrinkles on Fire Tiger's aged face were deep, as if the harsh wasteland had already engraved the sands of time on his body. On this piece of land, the majority of people couldn't live to Hua Hu's age, so his knowledge and reputation had always been second to none in the Black Fire tribe. Everyone had always trusted him for many years. That was until his son, Hua Yan, grew up and displayed his extraordinary talent and strength in front of the tribe's people. To this day, every barbarian of the Black Fire tribe believed that Huayan would be the next patriarch. His strength, wisdom, and courage were unparalleled in the Black Fire tribe. All of this gradually became a public opinion. Sometimes, it would make people feel as if everyone was waiting for the day of old Huahu's death. Fire Tiger didn't like this feeling. Since a long time ago, when his son, Huayan, rose to power, he disliked it. But even if he was the patriarch, he couldn't do anything about it. Therefore, he could only remain silent most of the time. Then, with a complicated gaze, he would secretly peep at his son who was growing stronger and stronger day by day. Patriarch? A somewhat surprised voice sounded in Huahu's ear, startling him. He woke up from his daze, only to discover that he had unknowingly been in a daze for a while. Is this the feeling of growing old? Huahu felt a bit sad for a moment, but he didn't show it on his face. He only muttered to himself for a moment, pretending to be in deep thought. Then, he asked, White Eagle, what do you think? This elder named White Eagle was also one of the most prestigious elders in the Black Fire tribe. He had assisted Huahu for many years and could be said to be deeply trusted by the old patriarch. But it was also because of this that White Eagle understood Huahu far better than anyone else. Huahu's expression just now had fooled the others, but not White Eagle's eyes. However, White Eagle didn't make any strange expression at this moment. Instead, a trace of worry flashed in the depths of his eyes, and he said to Huahu in a low voice, Patriarch, what Brother Qi Rhino said just now actually makes sense. If we let Huayan and that human called Lu Yuan continue to mess around like this, I'm afraid that something big will really happen. Huahu didn't immediately speak, but Fire Eagle, who was beside him, asked, Grandpa White Eagle, what bad things will happen? White Eagle glanced at Huahu, and after a moment of hesitation, he said, First of all, they are too warlike. It has only been a few days since they attacked the Divine Wood tribe, but they are already preparing to attack another tribe. Although the warriors of our Black Fire tribe are brave and valiant, there aren't too many of them. As long as it's a war, there will definitely be casualties, and as time goes on, we will definitely not be able to withstand it. The other elders and Fire Eagle nodded, and then White Eagle said, Also, now that Lu Chen has also taken the captured Divine Wood warriors as people of the Black Fire tribe. He has also placed Black Fire runes on their bodies, and named them Black Fire Guards, and they will only listen to him. What does this mean? If he has any ulterior motives in the future, how will our Black Fire tribe deal with him? And the worst thing is, at this moment, Qi Rhino, who had just sat down, suddenly stood up again, walked in front of everyone, and said with an agitated expression, Now we can all see that Lu Chen and Huayan plan to continue fighting, and then intend to exterminate the tribe, then capture people, and then use Black Fire runes to increase their fighting strength. But everyone, don't forget, according to their methods, it won't be long before our Black Fire tribe's warriors die, but the other tribes will capture more and more Black Fire guards and obey the priest. At that time, will the Black Fire tribe still be the Black Fire tribe? In the tribe, at that time, who would be the one who kept their word? Will it be us Black Fire barbarians, or that black-robed priest called Lu Chen? The room was silent, and no one opened their mouth to answer Qi Rhino's straightforward question. Only Fire Eagle, who was still young, suddenly flew into a rage. He turned over and jumped up, saying angrily, We can't let this happen. Damn it, we should have killed that monster with one strike. Killed that black-robed priest with one strike? The few elders in the room, except for the simple-minded Qi Rhino, who was extremely angry and impulsive, looked at each other. After looking at each other a few times, they all frowned and did not speak. Although most of the barbarians were impulsive, violent, and ferocious, as long as they were old and still alive, most of them would have seen a lot of things, experienced a lot of hardships, and understood some of the principles of life. On the contrary, barbarians like Qi Rhino, who had always been impulsive and angry until old, were actually rare in their age group. White Eagle was the same. Compared to when he was young, the current him was especially calm. He didn't answer Fire Eagle's words, but looked at the old Chief Fire Tiger and called out softly, "Chief?" Fire Tiger slowly raised his head and glanced at White Eagle. His voice sounded a little low. "What do you want me to do?" White Eagle wanted to say something but stopped. Chi Rhino, who was next to him, became anxious. He simply took a few steps forward and said, "Chief, the current situation of the tribe is critical. We need you to come out and rectify it." Fire Tiger sighed, and there seemed to be some helplessness on his face. He said, "Rectify? How? It's not like you don't know the situation of the tribe. Today, almost all the warriors of the younger generation were brought up by Huo Yan. They can be said to be dead set on him. Even I, the chief, may not be as useful as Huo Yan." White Eagle walked to Fire Tiger's side and sat down. He said softly, "Chief, no matter what, the position of chief is still yours. As long as you speak, the young people of the tribe will have to listen. Even if Huo Yan's reputation is soaring, as long as he doesn't say anything, as long as you come out, you can still control the situation." Fire Tiger's complexion slightly changed. He looked at White Eagle and said, "What do you mean?" White Eagle was silent, but at the same time, the other elders, including Chi Shi, stood up at the same time and walked behind White Eagle. Fire Tiger's complexion greatly changed. He suddenly stood up and stared at these people. He didn't know why, but his old face twisted. Even his voice became a little hoarse. He hissed, "Are you crazy? He is my son." Chapter 330. Behind Hua Hu, the young Fire Hawk suddenly stood up, but he seemed a little confused. He didn't seem to understand why his grandfather had suddenly become so agitated, and why the surrounding atmosphere had suddenly become so tense. Fire Hawk instinctively rushed to Hua Hu's side and grabbed the knife at his waist with one hand. He then looked warily at the tribal elders of his grandfather's generation, and then at his grandfather with some doubts. Opposite him, White Eagle, who was standing in front of the crowd, sighed. He didn't seem to care about Fire Hawk's offending appearance. He even reached out and patted Fire Hawk's shoulder, indicating that he had no malice. Then he looked at Hua Hu with a complicated expression, saying, "Patriarch, I've been with you for most of my life. At this age, I won't have any other thoughts." Hua Hu's expression seemed to have calmed down a little. He glanced at White Eagle, then reached out and pulled back his grandson, who was in front of him, and whispered, "It's all right." Fire Hawk let out an "oh," then Hua Hu looked at the others. After a long silence, he suddenly said, "Huo Yan said that Lu Chen is the emissary of the Fire God, and that he carries the will of the Fire God. What do you think?" Before White Eagle could speak, Scarlet Rhinoceros had already shouted, "This is complete nonsense. Since ancient times, not to mention our Black Fire tribe, even among the thousands of tribes in the southern wilderness, which one of them has ever heard of a human being a priest?" Hua Hu was speechless. White Eagle and the other elders didn't look good, but no one said anything. Scarlet Rhino's words were indeed very reasonable, and the facts of the past were indeed so. But at this moment, the people present, intentionally or unintentionally, had all avoided another equally irrefutable fact, and that was that Lu Chen possessed the power of black fire that couldn't be clearer. In any case, he wasn't a barbarian, nor a member of the Black Fire tribe. He didn't have the bloodline of the Black Fire, so there must be something wrong with him. Everything was fake. Even if he had the Black Fire, it must be a trick. Hua Hu's face was wooden. After a moment, he whispered, "Then Huo Yan," White Eagle immediately said, "that human race priest's methods are crafty. Perhaps he secretly used some method to confuse nephew Huo Yan's mind." Before Fire Tiger could say anything, Fire Hawk, who was standing behind him, suddenly became excited. He nodded repeatedly and said, "That's right, that's right. I also feel that father has been acting a little strange recently." He's been hanging out with that human all day long. Shut up. Hu suddenly shouted angrily, interrupting his grandson's words. However, White Eagle, Scarlet Rhino, and the others had already nodded and followed Fire Hawk's words. At the same time, they advised Fire Tiger, Patriarch, even Little Fire Hawk thinks so. This is an extremely critical moment. For the future of our Black Fire tribe, you must make a prompt decision. Fire Tiger's complexion was ashen. It seemed as if he had suddenly aged a lot at this moment. He looked at the old people in front of him, then turned his head to look at his grandson, Fire Eagle, who still had a face full of anger. His mouth opened a few times, but no words came out. In the end, he slowly sat back down. I'm already old. I don't know how many more years I can live. Fire Tiger's voice sounded particularly hoarse and low, as if he was making a final struggle. He said in a low voice, originally, I could not be more at ease with Hui Yen inheriting the position. But if something happens to me in the future, this is a major matter for the tribe. Everyone looked at each other, not daring to say anything for a moment. Only White Eagle's expression remained the same. He walked to Fire Tiger's side and said, Patriarch, don't worry. If nephew Hui Yen is fine, we naturally won't do anything to him. But if he's been bewitched too deeply by that human shaman and is unable to free himself, for the future of our tribe, there's nothing we can do. Hearing this, Fire Hawk, who was standing to the side, suddenly trembled. It was as if he had only just understood something. Immediately, his entire face turned pale, and he looked completely devoid of blood. Even his body began to tremble slightly. White Eagle glanced at this young boy and saw the shock, panic, and fear on his face. He frowned slightly, and a trace of disdain flashed in the depths of his eyes. Then, he looked at Fire Tiger and said in a low voice, Moreover, don't you still have Fire Hawk? He's your grandson, and your blood runs through his veins. As long as you focus on nurturing him, us old fellows will definitely support him with all our strength. In a few years, I think Fire Hawk will definitely become a qualified Patriarch. When he said the last two words, White Eagle turned to Fire Hawk and deliberately emphasized his words. Fire Hawk was dumbfounded, but gradually, he seemed to understand something. The emotions in his eyes suddenly became blazing, and even the fear and panic he had just felt were replaced by this new surge of excitement. He was so excited that even his breathing became heavy. But after a moment, he suddenly sensed something. He turned his head and saw that his grandfather, Fire Tiger, was staring at him. Fire Hawk's heart turned cold, and he subconsciously lowered his head. Fire Tiger stared at his grandson for a long time, and finally let out a long sigh and slowly shook his head. Before Yi became the mysterious and terrifying black-robed priest's maid, she had always been terrified when she arrived in front of the dark stone house. The advice of her clansmen had given her a tragic feeling, and she felt that she would soon die in that stone house. Perhaps she would even be tortured, but if it was for the sake of so many clansmen, perhaps everything would be worth it. But to her surprise, life in this stone house was different from what she had expected from the beginning. The black-robed priest was silent most of the time, but he did not offend her in any way. Well, perhaps he was not interested in her, and even bluntly said that she had an ugly smile. Well, it's better to be talked to like this than to be thrown on the bed and ravaged, Yezi thought with a bit of joy. In these days, the priest named Lu Chen ordered her to do things very naturally. All kinds of chores, including going out to call for her clansmen, were handed over to her. This also brought about another effect, and that was, the captured Divine Wood clansmen now generally believed that the black-robed priest had slept with Yi, and that was why they believed her. In the beginning, Yi actually wanted to explain, but she quickly gave up on this idea because she found that it seemed that this was the only way for her clansmen to be happy and live more energetically. Although many people began to look at her with strange emotions, which seemed to be hidden very deeply like some sharp things. Stabbing people. It was very strange, and even Yi herself could not figure out why. She felt that she had clearly come to Lu Chen's side for the sake of her clansmen. Although Lu Chen really did not do anything to her, in everyone's impression, shouldn't she have done something good for her clansmen? But why was there disdain and contempt in their eyes? Even if everyone was smiling and comforting her in front of her, the stinging in their eyes had never disappeared. Yi! A sudden call awakened Yi from her daze. Yi quivered and jumped up. She hurriedly ran over to the black-robed priest who was sitting in the dark and said, "Sir, do you have any orders?" Lu Chen looked at her indifferently and said, "Go to the camp and ask the Firerock chief to come here." Yi replied with an "oh," and agreed. Nowadays, Lu Chen had gotten used to ordering her to do these kinds of errands. She, who walked around the camp all day, seemed to have gained the approval of most of the Black Fire clansmen. She turned and walked out. But when she passed by the door, the giant wolf that was lying there like a guard dog suddenly roared at her and bared its teeth fiercely. Yi was so scared that she screamed and took 2 steps back. Seeing that it had scared Leaves, the black wolf Atu barked twice proudly and lay back down, as if nothing had happened. Yezi cursed the abominable big black wolf countless times in her heart, but on the surface, she could only avoid it awkwardly and even fearfully. In this dim stone house, it seemed that the black-robed priest was actually a decent person, but the beast was particularly abominable, scaring people all day long. A few nights ago, it even lay beside her in the middle of the night and suddenly roared, almost scaring Yezi out of her wits. She did not sleep well for several days. But after that incident, it seemed that the black-robed priest could not stand it anymore. He grabbed the giant wolf named Atsu and scolded it. He seemed to have kicked the giant wolf a few times. Only then did Atsu become more well-behaved, and Yi was gradually able to sleep peacefully. Unexpectedly, this stupid dog seemed to have a problem again today. While thinking, Yi had already walked out of the house and walked forward quickly. Now she was very familiar with the situation in the Black Fire camp. The other Divine Wood tribesmen were still somewhat restricted and could not walk freely in the Black Fire camp. She was the only exception. It was not the first time that she had gone to pass a message to Huyen on behalf of Lu Chen, so she knew where Huyen lived. She was very familiar with the way, but when she was about halfway there, Yi suddenly froze and stopped. A man stopped her on the road. After her identity as the black-robed priest's maid was made public, no one deliberately made things difficult for her or stopped her from walking in the camp. Today was the first time. Yi was a little surprised and a little nervous because she recognized this person. Although this person was not very old, he was very famous in the Black Fire tribe and many people would give in to him. He was Huiying, the grandson of the chief Huahu and the son of the chief Huyen. He stopped Leaf and looked at Leaf's face with a strange look. Chapter 331. The Fire Falcon was not very old. At most, he could be considered a half-grown boy, so Yezi did not feel anything strange from his body or the way he looked at her. If it were any other adult tribal male, Yezi would usually feel that they were too brave and strong. Based on her past experience, Yezi would usually feel that other people would look at her with a kind of tyrannical and possessive emotion. Whether it was the current victors of the Black Fire tribe or her former homeland, the Divine Wood tribe, it was more or less the same. After all, in the wilderness, men were superior to women for many years. In contrast, it seemed that although the black-robed priest called Lu Chen was a little cold to her, he seemed to be far easier to get along with than the others after living in the same room for a period of time. At least during these days, apart from the occasional harassment from the fat, big, stupid dog, Yezi suddenly found that the fear she should have had seemed to have faded a lot. Instead, her mood gradually became more relaxed. Eat well and sleep well? This feeling shocked Yezi. For a moment, she was in a trance, and an unusually complicated feeling flashed through her heart. Opposite her, the Fire Falcon was also startled. He originally thought that if he suddenly jumped out to stop this maidservant called Yezi, she would probably be surprised or scream. Who knew that there would be no surprise, and instead, he found that she was just standing there in a daze. This woman can't be stupid, right? The Fire Falcon thought to himself. After thinking about it, it was indeed very likely. If there were no flaws, the Divine Wood tribe probably would not have pushed her out. Hey! After thinking about this, the Fire Falcon suddenly felt a little depressed. He could not be bothered to talk nonsense with Yezi anymore, and directly asked, "Where are you going?" After being shouted at by him, Yezi immediately woke up with a start. At the same time, a look of surprise appeared on her face. No matter what, the Fire Falcon's identity was not ordinary, and it was very likely that he would be the future chief of the Black Fire tribe. He could not allow a captive like her to be disrespectful. Therefore, Yezi quickly lowered her head and said carefully, "I'm going to find the chief of the Firerock tribe." "Find my father?" The Fire Hawk frowned, then seemed to have thought of something, and his expression became somewhat ugly. He coldly snorted and said, "Did Lu Chen order you to find my father? What does he want?" Yi was startled for a moment and faintly felt that something was wrong. He secretly glanced at the Firehawk and said, "Young master, Lord Priest ordered me to invite the Firerock leader to the stone house to discuss some matters. He didn't tell me anything else." Fire Eagle thought for a moment and probably accepted Ye's explanation. After all, she was just an ordinary maid who had been captured. If there was really something important between her father, Huyen, and the black-robed priest, he would definitely not let her know. The Firehawk immediately nodded and said, "That's perfect. I just came from my father's place, so I don't have to make another trip. Go back and tell Lu Chen that my father and my grandfather are discussing an important matter in his residence, and it just so happens that I need to invite the priest over and ask for his opinion. Go back and ask him to come to my father's residence." Yi was stunned for a moment and said, "You want me to go and ask Lu Chen to come over for a discussion?" The Fire Hawk glared at her and said angrily, "What? Our Black Fire tribe's chief and chief are both here. Can't we invite him?" Whether or not they could invite the black-robed priest was naturally up to the person called Lu Chen to decide. Yi was just a little maid who had no choice but to live under someone else's roof. Of course, she did not dare to argue with the Fire Hawk. After being shouted at like that, she was immediately startled and hurriedly agreed before turning around and running away. The Fire Hawk looked at the back of the little maid as she ran away with large strides, and the anger on his face slowly dissipated. He then slowly turned around and could vaguely see the stone house where Huyen lived. As he looked at that place, a trace of haze flashed across his face. Yezi ran all the way back to the black-robed priest's stone house. When she entered the door, Atu, the malicious stupid dog, seemed to want to make fun of her again. Fortunately, Yezi hurriedly shouted to the dark corner inside, Your Excellency, the chief is calling for you." In the depths of the dimly lit stone house, a black shadow shook for a moment. Then, Lu Chen's voice came over, "Didn't you tell him that I asked you to invite him over?" Yi hurriedly told Lu Chen what the Fire Hawk had said to her when she met him on the way here. After Lu Chen heard this, he seemed to be silent for a moment. Then, as if to confirm with her, he repeated, saying, "Just now, what that Firehawk said to you was that the chief and the chief of the Firerock clan are discussing something, and then asked me to go over?" "Yes." Yi nodded repeatedly. "Oh." Lu Chen seemed to respond casually. Then, he quieted down and sat in the same place without any movement. Yi was a little stunned. At the same time, she thought to herself that this black-robed priest seemed to have an extraordinary position of power in the Black Fire tribe. Even when the chief and chief jointly invited him to a gathering, he dared to be so neglectful. Just as her thoughts were running wild, she suddenly felt a gust of wind in front of her. It turned out that a shadow slowly walked out from the depths of the stone house and walked towards the door. Yi breathed a sigh of relief in her heart. It seemed that this person was not too out of line, she thought. But at this moment, the giant black wolf Atsu that had shrunk back to the ground suddenly raised its head and stood up from the ground. It seemed to have sensed something. It stared at the approaching Lu Chen and suddenly growled in a low voice. The growl contained an indescribable fierceness. Yi was startled and could not help but take a few steps to the side. You're crazy again? Yi stared at the abominable big dog and shouted. She deliberately raised her voice so that the black-robed priest could hear her and scold the stupid dog like before. Because every time this happened, Atsu would behave for a while, and Yi could sleep peacefully for at least 2 days. Unexpectedly, after Lu Chen walked over, he did not have the slightest intention of scolding Atsu. Instead, he looked down at Atsu and reached out his hand to gently touch Atsu's head. Atsu bared its fangs and looked ferocious, as if it was about to eat someone. Yi clenched her fists nervously. She thought to herself, if you have the guts, bite this priest to death and then eat him, I'll consider you a capable person. You want to go with me? It was Lu Chen who asked Atsu in a low voice. Atsu wagged its tail and stood beside his feet. Lu Chen smiled, nodded, and walked out of the door. Yi was at a loss for a moment, unsure if she should follow. But before Lu Chen walked out, he suddenly turned back and said to her, "Go call the Black Fire Guards and ask them to go to the Firerock leader's side." Yi was stunned for a moment, then nodded and said, "Okay, I'll ask the group outside to go." There were a total of 20 Black Fire Guards trained by Lu Chen. These days, they were divided into 4 shifts and took turns to guard outside the house. There were 3 shifts a day, and each shift was 4 hours long. At the moment, there were 5 people guarding outside the house, so Yi asked this question. Unexpectedly, after a moment of silence, Lu Chen shook his head and said, "No, call all of them." Ye's body trembled slightly, and a look of shock appeared on her face. Lu Chen looked at her calmly and did not speak. After a while, Yi seemed to wake up from a dream and hurriedly said, Yes, I'll go now. As she spoke, she quickly ran out of the stone house. When the sunlight outside fell on her, she didn't know why, but she didn't feel any warmth. She only felt a faint chill enveloping her body, causing her to subconsciously shiver. Chapter 332. Lu Chen walked slowly through the Black Fire tribe's camp. Along the way, he often saw people from the Black Fire tribe coming and going. The Black Fire barbarians also saw Lu Chen, but perhaps out of awe or disgust, no one dared to approach him, let alone take the initiative to greet Lu Chen. Lu Chen was already used to this kind of treatment. In fact, this made him feel more comfortable. If the surrounding barbarians really saw him as a real tribe priest and worshipped him infinitely, he would have a huge headache if they rushed over and kowtowed to him. Along the way, the Black Fire tribe's camp looked very peaceful. Everywhere he looked, the Black Fire tribe members were also very normal. But as he walked towards Huiyan's residence, Lu Chen still quietly took out the Vulcan staff and held it in his hand. It was normal for a priest to have a staff in his hand. Perhaps it was because he walked slowly, or Yi ran quickly because she was anxious, but when Lu Chen was almost at the stone house where Huiyan lived, 20 Black Fire Guards had already rushed over. And behind these barbarian warriors, there was a barbarian girl looking at them from afar. It was Yi. But looking at her, it seemed that she didn't want to come over. Lu Chen glanced at her, but didn't mind. He even smiled at her, then turned his head to look at the Black Fire Guards. Just as Lu Chen had said before, these 20 barbarian warriors were actually Divine Wood race members who had been captured and surrendered. They had been selected by Lu Chen, and after casting black flame runes on them, he had ordered people to prepare special clothes for them. Now, they could be considered as a small army that only obeyed his orders. Even Lu Chen directly told these black fire runes that could kill people. In short, they could either work for him or die. This sounded very evil, but Lu Chen did it without any hindrance. It was unknown if it was because he grew up in such a dark and sinister environment that his heart was as hard as iron, or if he saw that these were all barbarians and had no compassion for them. As for what he was thinking in his heart, only he himself knew. In front of this mysterious and terrifying black-robed priest, the 20 black fire guards were all expressionless. After all, their lives were in someone else's hands, and no one would have a good expression. Lu Chen didn't care about this either. After all, he only wanted the power of these people to die for him. When he whispered some instructions to the black fire guards, and then turned to walk towards the Firerock house, Lu Chen suddenly thought of the time when he was still in the Kunlun Mountains in the north. At that time, although the days in the Kunlun party were a little boring, looking at it now, how could it not be a little warm? Moreover, there was still that young girl who loved to smile most of the time. Even recalling her seemed to warm his heart. He shook his head and collected his thoughts. Then, he looked at the door of the stone house and saw the fire hawk standing there. Apart from him, there were 2 other tall black fire tribe warriors standing behind him. Lu Chen quietly looked at Hua Yen. His gaze was calm, but it could not be said to be gentle. However, Hua Ying seemed to be a bold and courageous youth of the barbarian tribe. Not only was he not afraid of the black-robed priest like the other barbarians, he even sneered and stared at Lu Chen without any intention of retreating. Lu Chen walked over and said, "Why are you here?" The fire hawk snorted, but then he seemed to have thought of something and suppressed his temper. He said, "My grandfather and father are waiting for you inside. They have something to discuss with you." "Okay." Lu Chen replied, as if he did not suspect anything. He then walked towards the stone house. However, at this moment, Hua Ying suddenly stretched out his hand and stopped him. He said, "Wait a moment." Lu Chen's footsteps paused. He asked, "What is it?" Hua Ying expressionlessly said, "My grandfather just said that only the 3 of you can enter. At the same time, in order to be on guard, no one is allowed to bring weapons inside." "Weapons?" Lu Chen seemed to understand after thinking for a while. He raised the fire god's staff in his hand slightly and said, "Are you talking about this fire god's staff?" Hua Ying was just about to speak when he suddenly heard a ferocious roar from the side. It was the giant black wolf beside Lu Chen. It suddenly walked out from behind him and bared its teeth, staring fiercely at Hua Ying as if it was about to pounce on him. Hua Ying's heart turned cold. Previously, he had been pounced on by this giant wolf once. To be honest, that time, he was quite frightened. At this moment, he subconsciously took 2 steps back, but he immediately realized that he was a little embarrassed. He said angrily, "Lu Chen, aren't you going to take care of this demonic wolf?" Lu Chen waved his hand, and Atsu's ferocious aura retracted slightly. Hua Ying heaved a sigh of relief, but his face darkened as he said to Lu Chen, "Leave the fire god's staff here and go in yourself." Lu Chen glanced at him indifferently, but shook his head. Then, without saying a word, he prepared to walk into the house again. Hua Ying was immediately enraged. He had been the pride of the tribe since he was young, and everyone knew that he was the candidate for the future patriarch. For the sake of Hua Hu and Hua Yen, everyone would give in to him. Even adult warriors would be extremely polite when they spoke to him, and no one had ever looked down on him so openly. Therefore, Hua Ying exploded with the same impulse as before. Of course, it was also possible that he had other thoughts. He suddenly rushed in front of Lu Chen and blocked his path. He said angrily, "Leave the fire god's staff behind before you can go in." Lu Chen looked at him and said, "What if I don't want to stay?" Hua Ying sneered, "Then don't even think about going in." Lu Chen thought for a moment, then said with an, "Oh, all right, then I won't go in." With that, he turned around and left. Hua Ying's original sneer instantly froze on his face as if it had frozen. He opened his mouth in shock, but at this moment, he didn't know what to do. What are you doing?" he stammered as he shouted at Lu Chen's back. At the same time, His voice was filled with disbelief and indescribable anger as he shouted, "Our tribe's leader and leader are waiting for you. How dare you ignore them?" His voice was so loud that even the people far away could hear him. Everyone looked over. At the same time, from the stone house behind him, an old sigh could be faintly heard. There seemed to be a hint of helplessness in that voice. Until the end, Lu Chen still did not follow Hu Ying's orders. He put down the fire god's staff and entered the stone house to pay his respects to the tribe leader. To this black-robed priest, he didn't seem to care about anything other than the power in his hands that he would never let go. Before he left, he told Hu Ying, who was almost in a state of rage, that if there was anything else, he could ask his grandfather and father to go to the priest's stone house to find him. These words made Hu Ying fly into a rage. The shame of being humiliated in front of him and failing to complete his mission made this barbarian youth bristle with anger. He roared for his men to capture Lu Chen, but very quickly, reality taught him another lesson. The 20 black fire guards blocked the way in silence. But under the gloomy gazes of these people, the warriors behind Hu Ying didn't dare to rush over. They even grabbed Hu Ying tightly so that the angry youth wouldn't lose control and rush to his death. This was what happened in the Black Fire tribe's camp. But it was the Black Fire guards who had been captured by the divine tree who had suppressed the young chief of the Black Fire tribe. This was, of course, a major event that shook the entire tribe. So very quickly, warriors of the Black Fire tribe rushed over from all directions. The atmosphere in the camp suddenly became tense. Some people began to appear around the priest's stone house intentionally or unintentionally. Some warriors slowly approached and surrounded the stone house. But inside the stone house, everything seemed to be very calm. Yi had also returned. After seeing the confrontation just now, her heart was beating very fast. She had many questions to ask this black-robed priest, but she didn't dare to speak. But after a while, a question suddenly came from the dark shadows. "How many days has it been since you last saw the Firerock chief?" Chapter 333. Firerock chief? Yi was startled for a moment. After thinking carefully for a while, a trace of doubt flashed across his face. "I didn't pay much attention." Lu Chen said, "Don't you usually walk around the camp doing things? Could it be that you haven't seen him even once in so many days?" Yi frowned again and said thoughtfully, Now that you mention it, it seems that I really haven't seen the Firerock chief for a few days." Lu Chen lowered his head in thought. After a moment, he said to himself, "Is there really such a coincidence? We're going to battle in 2 days." Yi didn't hear clearly and asked, "Sir, what did you say?" Lu Chen was silent and no longer spoke. He just sat in the dim shadows of the house, as if he had merged with the surrounding darkness. Fire Falcon, who had been humiliated and belittled by Lu Chen in public during the day, did not rush over to fight Lu Chen as he had said when he flew into a rage. It was unknown whether his anger had subsided or he had been dissuaded. But for Fire Falcon, who had always been proud and arrogant, this should be a great humiliation. Before the sky turned dark, Lu Chen summoned the 20 black fire guards. In the end, as usual, only 5 of them were left on duty, while the other 15 were dismissed to rest. But before they left, Lu Chen called them to the dark stone house and spoke for a while. Outsiders couldn't hear or see what the black-robed priest had said to these people, but when the black fire guards left the stone house, they found that their expressions were slightly solemn. This scene was secretly seen by someone, and it didn't take long for the news to reach the most powerful people in the Black Fire tribe. Fire Falcon was accompanying his grandfather, Fire Tiger, as usual. He sent all the Black Fire guards back. After listening, Fire Falcon was the first to ask, and even his voice rose a few octaves. The one who spoke in front of him was Qi Shi. The one who had been sent to secretly monitor the situation in the black-robed priest's stone house was his subordinate. In the Black Fire tribe, the strongest and bravest barbarian warriors were naturally the group that had gone to the Sacred Wood tribe last time. But these black fire warriors mostly trusted fire rock, and secondly, they already had the black fire runes cast by Lu Chen on them. They were warriors with demonic abilities, so it was hard to guarantee which side they would side with. So in this situation, the few senior elders of the Black Fire tribe played a big role. They all had subordinates, and although they couldn't compare to the most valiant warriors, they were still a force not to be underestimated. At this moment, Scarlet Rhino smiled at the Fire Hawk and said, "Indeed. It seems that Lu Chen only came to show off his might during the day." When he went back, he saw that no one dared to provoke him. Fire Falcon fiercely gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, "This person insulted me during the day, I won't rest until he's dead." She smiled but didn't say anything. White Eagle walked to Fire Tiger, who was resting with his eyes closed, and said, "Patriarch, it's time to make a decision." Fire Tiger slowly opened his eyes and looked at White Eagle. White Eagle said, "It's best to end this quickly. That Lu Chen is the tribe's priest. Although he can't completely convince everyone, it's not appropriate to kill him in public. It's best to take advantage of the dead of the night to catch this person and his henchmen in one fell swoop. If it's the Sacred Wood tribe survivors, then our Black Fire tribe will have a bright future. At that time, even if it's daybreak and the other tribesmen find out, with you there to hold the fort, and a few more crimes will be thrown on his head. Naturally, everything will be peaceful." Fire Tiger was silent for a long time. He didn't agree, but he didn't refuse either. When everyone's gazes gathered on him, this old patriarch slowly stood up and walked towards a wall on the other side of the room without saying a word. When he walked to the side of the wall, he reached out and touched an inconspicuous place on the cabinet. There was a rumbling sound, and a secret door opened. Then, Fire Tiger walked in alone, and a moment later, the secret door closed again. There was silence in the room. Everyone looked at each other. She was the most impatient and asked White Eagle, "Patriarch, what's wrong with him? He won't be getting cold feet, right?" White Eagle pondered for a moment, then shook his head and said, "He won't, don't worry." After Fire Tiger walked into the secret room, his eyes swept around. He saw that the room was dim, and there was no furniture, only a sturdy stone chair connected to the ground in the middle of the secret room in front of him. A burly man was tied to the chair. With the dim light, it could be seen that the man was Huyen. This burly and strong barbarian leader was tightly tied to the stone chair with ropes. Apart from his head, his body couldn't move at all. There were many wounds and bloodstains on his head and face. It was obvious that he had experienced a fierce battle before he was tied to this place. At this moment, perhaps because he heard the footsteps, Huyen, who had his head lowered, looked up. In the dim secret room, the father and son looked at each other silently. But in their eyes, there seemed to be faint sparks flashing. After an unknown amount of time, Fire Tiger shook his head and slowly walked to Huyen's side. Then, he calmly sat on the ground next to him. A shadow enveloped the father and son, and the sky outside looked like it was about to turn dark. "Father, must you do this?" Huyen's voice sounded in the secret room. It was low and slightly suppressed, and there was a faint trace of exhaustion in his voice. Fire Tiger's expression was indifferent. After a moment, he said, "You forced me to do this." Huyen sneered, but didn't say anything. Fire Tiger waited for a moment, then continued, "I know you hate me in your heart, but have you ever thought about it? I raised you from a young age and nurtured you bit by bit. Everyone in the tribe knows that after I die, the position of tribe leader will be passed on to you. I've already done this much, what else do you want me to do?" Huyen said, "I don't want you to do anything, as long as you watch from the side, father. Everything I do is for the Black Fire tribe. I will make the Black Fire tribe strong again and restore the glory of our ancestors. You will make the Black Fire tribe fall into eternal damnation." Fire Tiger suddenly shouted, interrupting his son's words. Huyen glanced at him, then sneered and shook his head without saying anything. Fire Tiger took 2 deep breaths and calmed down a little. Then, he said, "That man called Lu Chen of the human race is definitely not an emissary of the fire god. He is a demon, a spy sent by the human race. You have been completely deceived by him." Huiyan lightly said, "He has the power of the black fire in his body." Fire Tiger shook his head, "That is just him pretending to be mysterious. The fire god will never pass his power to anyone outside of our black fire tribe." Huiyan stared at his father for a long time, then suddenly sighed and turned his head away, no longer saying anything. Fire Tiger didn't seem to care about his son's actions. He only looked at him calmly and said, "Son, I will give you one last chance. As long as you come with us tonight to capture that Lu Chen and then kill that monster with your own hands in front of everyone, then the past will be written off. Everything will be the same as before, you will still be the same, and the position of tribe leader will still be yours." Huiyan's expression twisted for a moment, as if he was struggling in his heart. But very quickly, his expression slowly became firm, and he heavily shook his head. Fire Tiger stood up and stared at his most outstanding son, whom he had high hopes for many years. His eyes were filled with disappointment, and he said in a low voice, "Why are you so stubborn? What kind of sorcery did that Lu Chen cast on you to make you become like this?" Huiyan was silent for a moment, then said, "Father, the ones in the wrong are you all, not me." Fire Tiger stared at him for a long time, then finally let out a long sigh, as if he had finally given up. He turned around and slowly walked towards the door of the secret room. Just as he reached out to open the door, his body paused for a moment, but he didn't turn around. Instead, as if he was giving his final instructions, he lightly said, "You will spend your last night here. But don't worry, I will properly train Fire Eagle. In the future, he will definitely become an even more outstanding tribe leader than you." As he finished speaking, he walked out. The secret door to the secret room closed behind him. Instantly, darkness rushed in from all directions, enveloping Huiyan in a black shadow. Huiyan looked up in the darkness, only to see that the sky outside the crack had finally turned completely dark. The corner of his mouth slowly revealed a cold smile, with a hint of mockery and disappointment. Night had come. Chapter 334. Deep into the night, the Black Fire tribe's camp was silent. Darkness shrouded the land, and the cold wind whistled past. There were also dark clouds in the night sky, and apart from a few torches around the camp, there was almost no other light. To survive in this harsh wasteland, the Black Fire tribe naturally couldn't be in a relaxed state. Even in the middle of the night, there were people standing guard around the camp. The guards vigilantly watched the seemingly endless wasteland around the camp. Although the sky was too dark to see too far, they still used the torches to illuminate the nearby areas. They were still on guard against dangerous monsters that might appear at night, or unpredictable dangers that came from the depths of the darkness. For example, in the past, the Black Fire tribe and the Divine Wood tribe had both been ambushed. Apart from the sentries that were set up around the camp, there would usually be 1 or 2 groups of barbarian warriors patrolling the interior of the camp. However, in this dark and windy night, there were no changes to the sentries around the camp. Only the sentries that were supposed to be patrolling the interior of the camp had disappeared. The people who arranged and dispatched these things were naturally the few influential figures of the Black Fire tribe. However, in the middle of the night, these few influential figures of the tribe didn't go to sleep as usual. Instead, they were gathered in a dark corner of the tribe. About 20 to 30 feet in front of them, there was a remote and somewhat lonely stone house. Occasionally, 1 or 2 figures could be seen walking around the stone house. In the darkness, Flaming Tiger, White Eagle, Scarlet Rhino and the others all stood together with solemn expressions. Firehawk also stood beside his grandfather, but perhaps because of his youth, he still couldn't be as calm as these elders. His childish face was filled with excitement and nervousness, and his hands were tightly clenched into fists, even slightly trembling. Behind them, in the dark shadows, there were dozens of silent figures lurking there. The cold glint of their weapons could be faintly seen, and a murderous aura could be felt. "Are you sure there are only 5 black fire guards outside the house?" Chief Flaming Tiger's voice rang out in the darkness as he asked Scarlet Rhino. Scarlet Rhino nodded and said with certainty, "Yes, there are only 5 of them. The other 15 have already returned to the Divine Wood Tribe's residence." Flaming Tiger was silent for a moment. He turned his gaze to the back and glanced at the warriors hidden in the shadows. Then, his gaze landed on the White Eagle. White Eagle immediately said, "Don't worry, Patriarch. These warriors are the younger generation of us old men. Although they may not be as good as Iron Bear, Black Ox, and the others, they have no problem fighting. The most important thing is that they are obedient." Fire Tiger silently nodded his head. He coldly snorted and said, "If it weren't for the fact that Hui Yen brainwashed the young warriors of my clan, causing them to worship that human priest, I would have killed this scourge myself." Hearing this, White Eagle only smiled and said, "Patriarch, there's no need to worry. All the fault lies with that human, Lu Chen. As long as he's killed, you can make a public announcement, and those young warriors will naturally come to their senses." Flaming Tiger nodded. It seemed that he agreed with White Eagle's words. He then took a deep breath and said, "Then let's begin." White Eagle turned around and looked at Scarlet Rhino. They then nodded at the same time and suddenly waved their hands towards the darkness. Whoosh! A low but intimidating roar suddenly sounded. Dozens of figures stood up at the same time, their weapons flashing with cold light. Then, under the cover of the darkness, they began to rush towards the lonely stone house. The night wind whistled, seeming to bring with it a bone-chilling cold. When it blew against people's faces, they could not help but shiver. Flaming Tiger seemed to be a little uneasy. He turned to White Eagle and said, "I heard that those black fire guards have been enchanted by Lu Chen. They can enter the demonification state and their combat strength will soar several times. Can we defeat them?" White Eagle said seriously, "Patriarch, don't worry. I have already thought about this. Although the demonification state is very powerful, it is not a big deal. First, in order to enter the demonification state, the human priest must be the one to cast the spell. But now that it is late at night, that Lu Chen must be asleep. He might be sleeping with that maid called Yi in his arms right now." At this point, the old men beside him all revealed a somewhat sinister and wretched smile. Flaming Tiger also nodded. Only Fire Eagle was startled. He interrupted White Eagle and asked, "Grandpa White Eagle, that is just a woman that the Divine Wood race captured and gave to Lu Chen. How do you know her name?" The White Condor paused for a moment as he stared at the Fire Hawk's face. A light flashed in his eyes before he shook his head and smiled at the Fire Hawk. "Silly child, I've long hated that human. Since we're going to deal with him, we naturally have to figure out everything, don't you think?" Crimson Rhinoceros laughed and said, "Yes, that makes sense. But Brother White Eagle, you are very careful. I didn't think of this." "Ha ha ha." White Condor smiled and ignored them. He said to Fire Tiger, "Secondly, the number of black fire guards is still small. We can take advantage of the night to launch a surprise attack and kill fewer people. No matter what, we will still win. As long as we kill that Lu Chen, the situation will be settled." Fire Tiger nodded. It seemed that he agreed with White Eagle's words. White Eagle glanced at his expression and said, "Then let's go and take a look." Everyone looked towards the stone house. They saw that there was a sudden cry of alarm and fighting in the eyes of the Black Shadow. Then, a large number of figures twisted frantically. Cold wind whistled among the sword light and sword shadows, but there was a smell of blood drifting with the wind. Everyone present had walked through mountains of blades and seas of blood in the wilderness. They were very familiar with the smell of blood. White Eagle clapped his hands and said with a smile, "It seems that it is going more smoothly than we thought. Patriarch, let's go quickly." Fire Tiger was also relieved. He laughed and said, "Okay." With that, the group of people strode towards the stone house. The darkness of the night was like a rolling tide, incessantly boiling. Further away, in the camp of the Black Fire tribe, there were obviously people who were awakened by the commotion here, and there was a commotion in the pitch-black night. Perhaps it was because of the murderous atmosphere, or perhaps it was because someone was obstructing them, but the commotion and cries of alarm were quickly suppressed. At most, there were only a few insensible cries of children that reverberated far away in the dark night with a hint of mournfulness. The crowd was still moving forward. Everyone looked very happy and excited. They were all looking forward to seeing a bloody feast. But halfway through, someone frowned, feeling that something was wrong. That was because the sounds of fighting still hadn't stopped even now. There were still flashes of cold light in the darkness ahead, and at the same time, there were stifled roars. That was the result of telling these young warriors to keep quiet and not make any noise. Closer, closer. Everyone subconsciously quickened their pace. As they neared the dark stone house, Flaming Tiger and the group of elders finally saw the situation in front of the stone house clearly with the help of the faint glimmer of light that shone nearby. Dozens of young barbarians gathered at the entrance of the stone house. However, they couldn't rush in at the moment. This was because there were 4 or 5 figures blocking the entrance of the stone house. They were relying on the narrow space to resist the surging attack. Although they had the advantage of the terrain, to be able to resist the siege of so many people, one could imagine that the battle strength of the people in the sect was not to be underestimated. Using the faint light to take a closer look, everyone immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. They saw that the muscles of the barbarians in the house were bulging, as if they were about to burst. Their bodies seemed to have swelled up, and they looked like demons and ghosts. It was the appearance of demons. Without a sound, without any warning, these Black Fire guards had suddenly entered a state of demons, and then blocked everyone at the door. Fire Tiger's heart suddenly sank, and a wave of unease swept through his heart. He stopped and was about to turn to ask White Eagle, but suddenly, his heart turned cold. It was a coldness that penetrated his heart and lungs. Because, there was a blade that was as cold as ice that pierced through his back, and then mercilessly, with a trace of cruel aura, directly pierced through his old chest. His entire chest and body instantly turned cold. Fire Tiger's body suddenly swayed, and then he turned his head to look. In that instant, he felt as if everything around him had suddenly slowed down. Qi Shi and the other elders were still nervously looking in the direction of the stone house. Only his grandson, Fire Eagle, who was standing close to him, seemed to sense something and turned his head to look. At the same time, a trace of fear appeared on his face. Another figure silently appeared behind him, moved his hand away from the hilt of the blade, and then smiled at him slightly apologetically. The night wind whistled past, and the white hair on that person's head became somewhat messy. Behind him, a black shadow was silently stepping out of the darkness. It was such a familiar, abnormally tall figure. It was as if the sky was filled with darkness, and this old barbarian was drowning in it. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.